Okay, this is going to be lecture number 7, and we're going to be talking about the 1920s, the Roaring Twenties, as some folks call it. Other historians call it the Jazz Age, and this is going to be from 1920 until 1929, the entire period of the 1920s. This is probably one of the most interesting parts of American history. So much takes place in the 1920s. America becomes a modern nation during this time period. We're finally an urban country and not a rural country in 1920s federal census. America is going to grow up during this time period. And of course, the biggest influence of America's maturity in the 1920s is going to be World War I. World War I is going to change everything for the American people. The America the boys returned to in 1919, it will not be the America they left in 1917 and 1918. America is going to change drastically during World War I. Okay, when the war comes to an end, Woodrow Wilson has plans to build a new utopia, a new society that is built on the freedom of democracy. He wants to expand democracy around the world here in this time period. The only problem is they dropped the ball during the Russian Revolution. They should have considered Russia as a major problem here in 1919. They did not do a thing about Russia, and Russia is going to get away with murder, more or less, pretty much guilty of murder, all through the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s. And the two leaders during this time period, Lenin, V.I. Lenin, and Joseph Stalin, are mass murderers. They're going to genocide millions of people while they're the leaders of the Soviet Union. And America is going to befriend them in World War II. And that's going to be a major mistake by doing so. It's going to lead to a Cold War, and now it leads into all kinds of espionage in America. It leads to worrying about our political system in America. Russia's trying to infiltrate our computer systems. We got all kinds of issues now with Russia, and it should have been handled in 1917. It could have been easier to have done it when it first started than to wait 70 years to do anything about it. Okay, that's what's going to take place here. The American people are scared of communism during this time period. And we're going to pass several laws that's going to try to keep communism at bay. One of them is called the Espionage Act. The Espionage Act was passed in 1918. This act is going to limit American freedoms, particularly the freedom of the press and the freedom of speech. The Espionage Act says you cannot criticize the president, nor the cabinet, nor the House, the Senate, nor the Supreme Court. You cannot criticize the American Army. You cannot write anything negative about the American Army. And so there's going to be lots of issues here that are going to be transpiring because of the Espionage Act. Probably the most important thing for us today is the Espionage Act is going to create what is called the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And this agency is started with the Espionage Act. Their main concern is Homeland Security. Homeland Security is their main concern here during this time period. That role will change during Prohibition. But after we get through with Prohibition, they'll go back to Homeland Security. And which makes me wonder, where were they in 2001 when the World Trade Centers came down? Why wouldn't they have abreast of what was going on here, guys, in this time period? Because they were in charge of Homeland Security. Okay, so the FBI is born during this time period. Now, one politician decided that he's going to try out the new law, the new Espionage Act. And in 1918, he goes to Canton, Ohio, and makes a speech where he criticizes President Wilson, his cabinet, the House and the Senate and the Supreme Court, and most importantly, he criticizes the American Army. Okay, he says this is a war we should never have gone to, and he criticizes it heavily. He's arrested under the Espionage Act, and he goes to federal prison in Atlanta. His name is Eugene Debs, the old socialist. And in 1920, he runs for the presidency, living in the Atlanta Penitentiary. And he got over 1 million votes here, guys. So some people kind of identified with Eugene Debs during this time period. but the main concern was communism. We call this the Red Scare. Okay, the Red Scare is going to lead into xenophobia. Xenophobia is being scared of newly arrived immigrants. Xenophobia wants to keep people out of the country, regardless of where they're from. They want to have closed borders here in this time period. Okay, so in 1918, we passed what is called the Alien Act to restrict immigration, mainly from Eastern Europe. Okay, the areas where communism is starting to develop here in this time period. Okay, it's also with the Alien Act, we're going to restrict immigration on Chinese coming to America, on Japanese coming to America, Mexicans crossing the border, coming into California and the Southwest for their agricultural jobs. They're migrant farm workers is what they are. And of course, the Immigration Act is going to look heavily at people who are Catholic. In this time period, the American people are concerned about the Catholic Church. They've been this way since the 1840s when the Chinese came over to help build the railroads and also help with the gold rush in California. They're also concerned because the Irish were Catholic who came to America during the 1840s in the potato famine. In the 1850s, a political party grew up that is called the Know Nothing Party that's totally against immigration. It's a nativist party. It's a native party for white Americans. In other words, white supremacy was the whole background, the backbone of the nativist parties, which include the Know Nothing Party during this time period. You had the American Party also, who is anti-immigrant. So immigration has been a major issue in American history ever since the 1840s. Before this time, we were too busy growing, expanding, and adding to the country. And after the 1840s and 1850s, when America has pretty much reached maturity, we started getting immigration. Well, here's the strange part about all this stuff. Of all these laws they passed, 40 million people come to America, mainly from Europe, Eastern Europe in particularly, between 1870 and 1910. Between 1870 and 1910, over 40 million people came to America. And they're trying to stop this onslaught of immigration. They figure that if all of Europe comes to America, we will gain the European problems. So it's a real interesting time period here for the American people. And when it comes to xenophobia, the Red Scare, the Alien Act, and so forth. Well, the big seal on all of this, the big capping of all of this, will come in 1924. In 1924, United States Congress is going to pass what is called the Johnson-Reed Act. That's spelled Johnson, Johnson, Reed, R-E-E-D. The Johnson-Reed Immigration Act of 1924. They decided to put a quota on immigration. The quota is going to be 3%. A 3% quota on the people from around the world who can come to America. And that 3% applies to nationalities. So they're going to say that only 3% of Hungarians who came in 1890 can come to America after 1924. 3% of Japanese can come to America after 1924 based on the 1890 federal census. So the 1890 federal census is the measure in which they used to get this 3%. Now here's what's interesting. Somebody destroyed that census. We do not have the census of 1890. And I think that somebody in this time period got a hold of it because as I understand it, it had water damage and you could not read it. The pages all stuck together. It all got blurred because they used regular ink to write in the federal census booklets, and it was destroyed. We have maybe out of 14,000 counties in the country, we probably have close to 300 in the federal census of 1890. You can't use it trying to find your family history. If you're going to do family research, you got to go to 1900's federal census and then go to 1888's federal census. You're going to lose 20 years of the federal census. And a lot of folks died in that time period, and a lot of folks were born in that time period, and we have no record of it because the 1890 census is gone. So that's a pretty interesting synopsis here. Okay. So guys, the Johnson-Reed Act is going to limit immigration to 3% of those people who came in from various countries using the 1890 federal census that is flawed. Okay. So it's interesting. You look at how this transpires here and the political mindset of this time period. And one of your biggest groups of people that were totally against immigration in the 1920s was the Ku Klux Klan. And we'll discuss them in a little bit. They were also against the Catholic Church. They're against the Jewish people coming to America. So the Ku Klux Klan is going to have a lot of backbone using this Johnson-Reed Act here of 1924. Okay? All right. President Wilson had totally failed to sell the American people on his 14 points. Congress abandoned him. The American people abandoned him. The political parties abandoned Wilson's plans for a future with no war. So what it boils down to, people, is that World War I was never solved. There was never a strong peace treaty for World War I. You know, Henry Cabot Lodge, who was head of the Senate during this time period, he didn't have anything to do with any of it. And it won't be until 1922 when the United States signs a watered-down version of the Treaty of Versailles. It has no teeth. It has no teeth. They did form the League of Nations, but the United States never joined it. They used racist terms to explain why they would not join the League of Nations, and they blamed it on the colored people of the world. The United States didn't want to take any chance of losing their white supremacy in the League of Nations. And so, therefore, the United States did not adopt or go to the League of Nations. The Treaty of Versailles will be signed in 1922, and it is so watered down, it is totally worthless. So what I'm telling you guys is that World War I never ended. World War I is going to cause more problems, mainly because we went over there. George Washington told the American people in 1796, do never go to Europe for a foreign war. It'll be a trap in which you cannot get out of. And speaking of that trap, I want to tell you a little story here. In 1919, while Woodrow Wilson was in Paris working on this Treaty of Versailles, a young man from Vietnam, which is called French Indochina during this time period, a young man from the Vietnamese area of the world wants to talk to President Wilson. He has urgent discussions that he wants to have with the president. And this urgent message is about the French and how the French are abusing the people of Vietnam and how the French must be sent out of Vietnam. Now remember, guys, some 20 years earlier, we had gone into China with the Boxer Rebellion and helped China clean up imperialism in their country. Nothing was done about Siam, which is now Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Nothing was done about this part of the world. And the French had a strong hand here on stealing their raw materials to use for manufacturing in France to help them on the worldwide market. Okay? This young man has got grievances against France, and he wants to talk to the president. He says, is anybody in the world that can help us out and can see our point of view, it'd be President Wilson. This man sent several letters to President Wilson, and Wilson denied to see him. He would not see this young man from Vietnam. His name was Ho Chi Minh. He becomes the president of Vietnam. He leads North Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And here's a good example of how America totally overlooked a potential problem and let it grow into a major conflict that'll take the lives of some 54,000 American boys. A war that's going to last over 15 years and it's going to destroy the American economy in the 1970s. So President Wilson was not paying attention to what's going on here. Well, you know, guys, 1920 was an election year. President Wilson had a stroke in October of 1919. He was totally incapacitated. He could not leave the country. His wife ran the country out of the White House. She made to believe that he was not as ill as they said he was, and that he could still function and run the country, even though we did not see much of him. And he's president until March the 4th, 1921. That's a long time, guys. And during this period from October of 1919 until the election in November of 1920, the American people began to depart from the ideologies of Woodrow Wilson. The political parties abandoned Wilson's plans for world peace. Actually, they made fun of it. Okay? So your political parties, both Republicans and Democrats, will break ties with anything Wilson wanted to do when it came to world peace after World War I. Okay? Now here's the men who run for the presidency in 1920. The governor of Ohio is named James Cox. James M. Cox is the governor of Ohio. He is going to run as a Democrat for the president. Okay? He's going to choose a running mate who was Undersecretary of the War during World War I. This man comes from a wealthy New York family. This man is a well-known lawyer. He's also a fourth cousin to Theodore Roosevelt. And Mr. Cox is going to choose Franklin Delano Roosevelt to run for the presidency with him in 1920. So Mr. Cox and Mr. Roosevelt are going to run as Democrats here in 1920. Running as Republicans will be the senator from Ohio, whose name is Warren Harding. Mr. Harding has worked his way up from being a newspaper man to being a newspaper editor. He became the lieutenant governor of Ohio. He became the governor of Ohio in 1910. He becomes a senator during the First World War. And here he's going to run for the presidency in 1920. Mr. Harding, the Republican candidate from Ohio, is going to choose Calvin Coolidge, the governor of Massachusetts, to run with him. Okay? So Calvin Coolidge is going to run with Mr. Harding for the presidency. And then, of course, Eugene Debs is going to run for the Socialist Party. Okay? Now, here's what the big deal is on this political campaign in 1920. In 1920, for the first time, the eligible voters in America has doubled. You have twice as many people who qualify as voters than you did in 1916. This is because the women are going to get the right to vote. In 1919, the American women finally, after the state of Tennessee ratified the 19th Amendment, get the right one, David. And so they ratified the 19th Amendment. Tennessee did it, and this becomes the law of the land. Y'all know the story of all this, but there was a young legislator in Tennessee whose mama got on him and told him he better vote for women's suffrage. Tennessee was not going to pass it. It lacked a vote being passed. And this young man cast the vote for his mama. And that's how come the ladies got the right to vote in 1919, because this young man stood up and made the right decision. And his mama probably told him what's going to happen if he did not vote for women's suffrage in Tennessee. And that's what ratified the 19th Amendment to the Constitution here in 1919. So in 1920, the American women will have their first chance to vote, and they did it. They came out in the droves to vote. The women had finally got their voice to be heard in American politics. So it's a big deal here, okay? And these ladies helped to elect Warren G. Harding. Mr. Harding was about 52 years of age. He was married. And he was not a very bad-looking young gentleman for his age. A lot of women kind of liked how he looked, and they voted for him. So you're going to start seeing this popularity contest over how these folks look who are running for the presidency. Okay, so it's going to be a kind of a familiar refrain over and over again as people vote for the candidate they see as being more presidential in looks than not being so. Okay, so you're going to start seeing higher standards being applied to these political candidates here. Well, Mr. Harding wins the presidency. He totally opposed the 14 points of Mr. Wilson, and he opposed the federal regulation of industry. He tells the American people, we're going back to normalcy. We're going back to normalcy. You know, these themes appear over and over again. Mr. Trump says, we're going to return to being a great nation. We're going to make America great again. That's the same kind of policies here. You're going to go through and return to normalcy. You're going to turn back the way things used to be, and you're going to make America great again. You see a lot of the same rhetoric here between these American presidents. Compare the ones between 1920 and then the year 2020, 100 years difference here. They're bookending each other and their slogans here of the time period. Okay, Mr. Harding opposed federal regulation of industry. When he says he's going to make America great again, he is discussing deregulating all the legal acts, all the legislation that's been done in the last 20 years. He wants to get rid of the Department of Labor. He wants to get rid of the income tax. He wants to get rid of the Clayton Antitrust Act. He wants to get rid of trust busting to let's have pure laissez-faire economics where competition rules the economy, being a cutthroat or being monopolistic. So he wants to turn back the clock. It's like me telling you guys today, you're going to go to your cell phones. That'll not be a cell phone on anybody's body. There'll be no such thing as cell phones, our smartphones, our laptops, our Facebook, our Twitter, any of this stuff. It's all going to be gone. Out in the lobby, in the hallways of our colleges, next to the bathrooms will be a payphone. And that's where you make your telephone calls from. You go over to the student union, down where the cafeteria is located, there'll be a payphone. There might be 2 or 3 payphones there. When you go to the airport, there'll be a bank of telephones. Because nobody has cell phones. Nobody has cell phones. Isn't that crazy? You can't text. You cannot message. You can't send photographs. You cannot do anything. Okay? That's what he's talking about, guys. Going back to the typewriter. Going back to the old rotary dial telephones that hangs on the walls in houses and in buildings and on street corners and at gas stations. These old payphones. Okay? That's what he's discussing. You can't do it. Once you have come to a modern stance with new technology and new ways of thinking and new ways of communications, you can't go back. There's no going back. So his return to normalcy is going to prove to be a failure because you can't turn back the clock. You've got to progress with what you have and hoping that you can evolve it to be suitable and be comparable to what it was in the past. Okay? So he is going to try to return to normalcy to make America the way it was before World War I, to make it way America was before 1900, before the progressive presidents. That's what he's after here in this time period. Well, Mr. Harding makes a major mistake that U.S. Grant had made, a mistake that Andrew Jackson had made. He brought his friends to the White House. He brought his friends in here to help him run the country. He put some in the cabinet. He used some as advisors. Okay? These people that he brought in to advise him to be part of his cabinet are all from Ohio. and they are called the Ohio Gang. They're called the Ohio Gang, G-A-N-G, okay? The leader of this group is going to be Harry Daughtry. Harry Daughtry, and that's spelled D-A-U-G-H-E-R-T-Y. Harry Daughtry is the Attorney General. He's also the best friend of Harding. When Harding decided to run for politics around 1905, he hired Harry Daughtry as his spin master, as his PR man. And Harry Daughtry is the gentleman who created the politician Warren G. Harding. And he makes Mr. Daughtry the Attorney General. The Attorney General is over the law enforcement in the country. A very important position to have. In 1919, not only did the women get the right to vote, we also passed what is called the Volstead Act. It was ratified, and by 1920, it is law of the land. It brings in prohibition. The Attorney General is in charge of prohibition laws. The agency that he uses for prohibition is going to be the FBI. In return, the FBI has appointed some 5,000 agents to be in charge of prohibition. Their job is to make sure the laws of prohibition are being enforced. They had 5,000 of them. I want to tell you guys something. New York City alone had 5,000 speakeasies. 5,000 of them. And we had 5 mobs in New York City. You had the white mob, you had the Jewish mob, you had the Italian mob, you had the Irish mob, and you had the African American mob. You had 5 mobs with warfare going on in New York City with over 5,000 speakeasy bars. And we only have 5,000 agents to cover the whole country. I'm telling you guys, Northwest Florida was wide open. Florida and Georgia were wide open. We had a brewery over in New Orleans making liquor under the disguise of the New Orleans Candy Company. They were located on Magazine Street. Whenever you make moonshine liquor, it smells just like candy being made. And they were producing about 10,000 gallons of hard liquor a day out of this candy company front in New Orleans. And the liquor they produced was put into gasoline cans. So you thought they were hauling gasoline around town in these open back trucks. And these trucks would leave the candy company usually about 7 in the evening when it first got dark. And they make numerous trips, be several dozen trucks, going down to the levee here in New Orleans, unloading these gasoline cans onto barges. And when the barge was filled up, they towed it out into the river and out to the Gulf. And they stayed 8 miles off the coast of Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, and Florida. That's international waters, guys. And you had speedboats who went out from the coastline out to meet the barge. And they brought the liquor back into Okaloosa County and Escambia County and Jackson County, Mississippi, and Mobile County, Alabama, Tampa, Florida, Hillsborough County, Bay County. And these rum runners were bringing all this liquor into the areas here of the Gulf Coast. And of course, this liquor made its way up the Chattahoochee River to Columbus, Georgia, on up to Eufaula, on up to Atlanta. So it's not unusual. The rum runners in Mobile were carrying liquor as far north as Tuscaloosa and as far north as Birmingham, using the river systems to do it with. So you get an idea of how these 5,000 agents could not even control one city, much less the whole country. All right. In Chicago, you had a big mob out here. You had Pretty Boy Floyd. You had Al Capone. It's a mess out here in Chicago. On Valentine's Day in 1931, you had the Valentine's Day Massacre, in which they had a gang warfare take place. It's just totally crazy out here in Chicago. They were coming to Northwest Florida trying to find sugarcane. Al Capone came down numerous times. He'd go to Georgia, Northwest Florida, South Alabama. He'd go to Mobile. He'd go to Jackson County, Mississippi, which is Biloxi and Pascagoula. He'd even go to New Orleans. And he was trying to find a good supply of sugar cane to send northward as syrup for his moonshine business. That's why he came here, guys. He'd come to the Valparaiso Inn here in Valparaiso. The Valparaiso Inn had lots of gangsters who came in here. The revenue agents out of Pensacola knew they were here at different given times, and they'd come over trying to arrest these mafia people. And when the word got that the G-men were coming out of Pensacola, they would take off and hide. The big hiding place was White Point, where the Mid-Bay Bridge comes in at Blue Water Bay. Another hiding place was Postal Point, where you guys on Egland go swimming and take your boats out at Postal Point. These were two big areas to hide out. They always said that the owners of the Valparaiso Inn had speedboats docked, ready to go at the docks here, behind the Valparaiso Hotel. So it's interesting, guys, of how this is going to be part of our history here in the local area. We had a big sugarcane mill over at Villa Tasso, and they put sugarcane into 10-gallon barrels. Now, when you guys go buy syrup, which is what this was in these big barrels with syrup, when you go buy syrup, you only buy a couple of pints. You don't buy a whole lot at a time. And it's not for consumerism to put syrup in 10-gallon buckets. And they labeled it the Belle of Paradise Syrup Company. And they carried all this syrup by truck to Crestview, put on the L&N Railroad, who carried this syrup all the way to Chicago. I went to the A&P grocery ads in the Chicago newspapers in the 1920s. I went to the Piggly Wiggly ads in this time period. And not a single grocery store in Chicago in the Tribune of the 1920s, not a single grocery store sold Belle of Paradise syrup. Nobody sold it. It all went to be made into rum by Al Capone and these mobsters out of Chicago. Do y'all know that Mr. Plouffe built an airport here at Valparaiso? It's now the runway that crosses runway 19. That's the one that comes over Valp, Niceville. This runway goes across. It goes from the Aero Club across the runway out toward the airline terminal. It's used now mostly by helicopters or by Ospreys. It's not used for a regular commercial or military airplanes to fly in on. But that's the original runway. Mr. Plouffe, who controlled the area, he bought the area in 1921 from a brokerage firm in Pensacola, and he paid $250,000 for the north side of Chattahoochee Bay. And that starts at Brooks Bridge and goes all the way to the 331 bridge. That's a lot of land he got for $250,000. All right? And he has plans to start an airline company flying the old Ford Trimotors to about 30 cities out of Valparaiso and get people involved in the prohibition movement and get people involved in tourism here in Okaloosa County. He wanted to get these mobsters in here and get that liquor out of here to different places pretty quickly. He saw a big marketplace. He wanted to go to 30 different cities out of Valparaiso. And he built a triangle, an upside-down triangle where the head of the triangle was at Valparaiso, and it fanned out across the Midwest and across the Great Plains. You know what's funny? Allegiant Airlines today are flying to those cities out of Valparaiso. That's what's funny. That's what's really hilarious. That what he wanted to do 90 years ago or 80 years ago, one airline is now doing it out of our area for tourism. Okay? So, guys, prohibition is going to be a total failure, and Mr. Daughtry is the big problem because he takes kickbacks to turn his head in the other direction while illegal deals are being performed across the country. He is making money off prohibition, guys. And he gets caught red-handed in 1922. And a big scandal breaks out and Harry Daughtry is fired from his job. So corruption becomes a major, major part of Mr. Harding's administration. And then here comes Charles Forbes. He's in the newspaper business, the magazine business out of New York City. Y'all have heard of Forbes. They still publish a business magazine out of New York City. Charles Forbes becomes in charge of the Veterans Affairs. We had close to 400,000 boys that were wounded in the First World War. And a lot of these boys were wounded or were harmed by mustard gas. Mustard gas would make you blind. Mustard gas would tear up your throat so you could not eat. Mustard gas destroyed your hearing. Any moist area of your body that mustard gas got into, it started itching. And these boys literally clawed their armpits and their groins apart because they got into mustard gas. It's horrible. And a lot of these boys could not go home because their parents and their spouses could not take care of them. And so we have the need for veterans hospitals. Your first big major veterans hospital is going to be Walter Reed. And Mr. Forbes is going to start taking bids to build federal hospitals across the country, VA hospitals. Well, it turns out that he's taking bribes in order for people to bid to build these hospitals. He wants money up front for you to have a chance to bid to build a hospital. Some folks says that Mr. Forbes made as much as $25 million off of this Ponzi, this crazy campaign he had to build these hospitals. That he stole $25 million from the American people. He's exposed, and he's forced to leave office. All right, and then you had Albert Fall. Mr. Fall is Interior Secretary. He's in charge of our precious minerals, including oil supplies. The biggest user of oil in this time period is going to be the United States Navy. Because the Navy needs oil, we have two secret locations in which we store oil for the Navy. One is in Northern California, and the other one is in Wyoming. The one in Wyoming was hard to monitor, to watch out after. And Mr. Fall begins to sell naval oil out of Wyoming to his friends and putting the money in his pocket. This scandal is called Teapot Dome. Teapot Dome was the oil supply in Wyoming. And here comes the Teapot Dome scandal of 1922 and 1923. And it's a mess. It's a big mess. And then the president himself gets into trouble. There are rumors that he's having extramarital affairs. And one of his mistresses is the wife of his best friend. Their name is the Brittons, Britton. Nan is also good friends with Florence, the First Lady. And sometimes the Brittons and the Hardings vacationed together. And it was noted that Mr. Harding and Nan would slip off to go to a special event or go to a special place that they wanted to go sightsee. The husband and Florence were not interested in going, so they'd go by themselves. And usually the attraction was a hotel room. So this president is having extramarital affairs, which is a big scandal in the 1920s. All right. And then there comes word of a housemaid in the White House who the president has got pregnant. The rumor is the president had pulled her. She's about 18 years old. He pulled her into the broom closet. And instead of having a stained dress like Bill Clinton had to deal with, Gracie Cross produced a baby. This young girl had a baby. The president was the baby's father. And during her pregnancy, the president offered several times to pay for an abortion. Now that's really getting down here in this time period. I want to tell you something. The first time a gentleman, or the last time a gentleman who's accused of extramarital affairs is going to be told not to run for the presidency is going to be in the 1980s. So marital affairs were looked down upon. Being divorced was looked down upon highly in the 1970s. Ronald Reagan divorced his first wife, Jane Wyman, and married Nancy Davis. And so he's the first president that I can think of that had a first marriage, divorced, and then had a second marriage. Usually divorce would kick you out of being a president. They would not accept that in these earlier years. That was seen as being a weakness here the man had. He can't keep his wife. How can he go through and control the country? That's a big issue here. And so here you have President Harding being associated with a baby that was conceived in the White House, in the broom closet. All right, with the Teapot Dome scandal, this extramarital affair scandal, the Veterans Affairs scandal, the adultery scandal with the prohibition. Mr. Harding says, I've got to go talk to the American people. I got to go through and explain myself. I got to go through and save my presidency. So he's going to have a railroad car that'll be totally fixed up, bathroom, kitchen, bedroom, living room, the whole 9 yards. He'll have a train car that will be appointed just for him. And they'll hook this presidential train car behind a regular passenger train car. The president and his wife get on board here in Washington, D.C., and they take off to Buffalo to start his campaigning to explain himself to the American people. Remember, guys, every 20 miles you got a town, which means that every 20 miles for 3 minutes, or at the most 5 minutes, he had to talk to the American people on the train track and try to explain himself to them, and then move to the next place, and then move to the next place. Well, guys, when he got to Buffalo, New York, he was tired of explaining himself to the American people, and they crossed over the Canadian border. This was in the middle part of June of 1923. And all during the end of June into the middle part of July, he's going across Canada. Is that a goodwill tour of the American people? No, he's up here on the Trans-Canadian Railroad. He's going up here through all these large cities. He's going over here into the Canadian Rockies. He's spending time in Lake Muir and Lake Louise. He's spending time in Banff and time in Calgary. He even goes over to British Columbia, and he spends time here. At the end of July, the train is going to leave Vancouver and head down to Seattle. And here in Seattle, the president becomes ill. The First Lady demands that they carry the president to San Francisco to a suitable hospital. And here on the 2nd day of August, 1923, President Warren G. Harding dies. A lot of folks believe that he died with a heart attack. That's generally the consensus that he did die of a heart attack. But some people kind of think that his wife might have poisoned him. We did not do autopsies during this time period, so we don't really know what happened to this man. But more than likely, he died from a heart attack in this time period. Well, when he died, they could not find the vice president anywhere. He's out goofing around. This vice president should have been at the White House the whole time President Harding was going across Canada, because he is the one who's supposed to be in charge when the president is not accessible. They can't find it. Finally, at 2 o'clock on the morning of August the 3rd, they found him at his father's home in Vermont. He had gone up to see his dad. And here he gets word that he's the new president. Well, the father is a notary, which means that he can sign legal documents. If you want to go through and buy a house, or go through and have an insurance policy, or go through and have a will stabilized, you get a notary to sign it to say that you signed that document. They witness you signing the document, and they notarize it. That's what he does. And this man believes that he's halfway legal, and he decides to swear his son into the presidency there at the kitchen table. He comes to Washington, D.C. about 2 days later, and the new Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Mr. William Howard Taft, said that it's not legal, and Mr. Taft, a former president, swears in Calvin Coolidge. Former President Taft, Supreme Court Chief Justice, head Chief Justice, is going to swear in Mr. Coolidge. All right, Mr. Taft will also swear in Coolidge for his first term when he runs for the presidency. He'll also will swear in Mr. Herbert Hoover. So the former president is going to swear in 2 men for the presidency here in the 1920s. Okay, Mr. Coolidge tells the American people that America's business is business. America's business is business. This one statement alone is going to lead to the Great Depression. Y'all think about it, guys. In the 1920 federal census, 51% of the American people lived in cities. We're now an urban country by 1%. 49% of the people live in the countryside. And of that 49%, 45% are farmers. Okay? He's denying 45% of the country from the economy. He's dividing the country between urban and rural. You've got to have the urban areas being fed by the rural areas. Rural areas are there to help feed the urban areas of the country. Okay? America's food supply could become critically low if you lose your farmers. You've got to have them. Okay? Now, a lot of the Americans in urban centers are growing their own gardens. This all started in World War I. Mr. Herbert Hoover was in charge of the Food and Fuel Administration during World War I. And he told the American peoples to take part of your backyard and row it up and plant gardens in it. Plant you some corn, some peas, some butter beans, some squash, zucchini, okra, watermelons, whatever. And most yards in America were like an acre in size. If your house was toward the front part of the street, you had a big backyard. And you could row up half of your backyard into a garden and feed the whole family. They also promoted urban chicken coops to have chickens in your backyard. And people had rabbits in their backyard. Okay? They didn't do hogs. They had a stunk too bad to have hogs back there. But you did have chickens and you did have rabbits back here that were being raised for consumption here. Mr. Hoover told the American people, we got to send as much food as possible to the boys at war. And so you have your victory gardens in your backyard. Okay? So some urban folks are still using their backyards in the 1920s to grow their gardens in. I know people today got backyard gardens. That's not uncommon here. And even here in Valparaiso, I know some they have some tomato plants, and I do it. I have tomato plants and watermelons and squash and cantaloupes. I got a bunch of fruit trees in my yard. So we're still doing that to a certain extent. Okay? Well, guys, Mr. Coolidge does not care about the American farmer. During World War I, the American farmer made great profits off of this war. They bought gasoline-powered tractors. They bought all kinds of plows and harpers. They brought all kinds of equipment to harvest their crops with. They mechanicalized the gardens, the fields here in America. They started planting more corn and more wheat on the Great Plains. America is the world's breadbasket here in World War I. The war comes to an end. There's not such a demand on all this food as there was during World War I. And these farmers are still producing at the levels or higher levels, higher crop yields than they had during World War I. And their crops did not bring in any profits. A loaf of bread in 1923 would cost you 3 cents. A loaf of bread would cost you 3 cents. A gallon of milk would cost you about a nickel. The farmers could not make money in this time period. In 1924, the American farms come to Congress asking for stimulus money to help them pay off their debts. They borrow money from the banks. Banks were foreclosing on these farmers. They needed help. And Congress did agree to farm aid. In 1925, the farmers were approved of more money. In 1927, they were approved of more money by Congress to keep them afloat. President Harding vetoed all 3 farm bills. By 1927, 45% of the American people, your American farmers, are now living in a depression. 45% of your American people are in a depression. These are your farmers of America, because Calvin Coolidge would not do anything to bail them out in the mid-1920s. America's business is business. Now, how crazy is that? That's like having red states and blue states. We're not red states and blue states. We're the American people. And we got to get rid of this notion of being divided by these different color codes and these stupid codes that political parties put into place that are totally ridiculous. And Mr. Harding is guilty of getting this started here. He looked down upon the farmers as being un-American pretty much, and looked to the industrial leaders who are robbing their workers as being the guardians of America. It's crazy. It's totally crazy here. Well, I will tell you this. The American farmers do go into recession. They do lose their farms. By 1929, here comes the Great Depression. You can blame 2 items right here in the first part of this lecture that led to the Great Depression. The first one is going to be prohibition. All those tax dollars that we lost by putting liquor underground and not taking tax off this liquor is going to be a major, major reason we go to a Great Depression. Those tax revenues off of liquor could have kept us out of a Great Depression. And then the farmers. If we'd helped the farmers out during this time period, there had never been a Great Depression. Okay? Now add to this one other thing. This is out of Europe. We did nothing to help Germany. Germany comes out of World War I with a 9,000% inflation rate. 9,000%. That is the same inflation rate the American South had in 1867. You can do a lot of comparisons between the American South and the rise of Hitler, who in the American South is named Jim Crow. And it's a great comparison. Jim Crow and Hitler are almost the same person. One's an ideology and one's a human, if you want to call him that. Okay? Y'all didn't realize that. Fascism is Jim Crow that goes to the next step. Not only you go through and separate your people, the ones that you separate from are the ones that you destroy. Fascism leads into genocide. But does Jim Crow have the same features? What's a lynching, guys? And in those lynchings, they hung the body from a tree. And once the body has gotten through with its convulsions, or shaking, convulsions, they burned the bodies. They put a fire under the person they just lynched, cut the rope, and the person fell into the fire and was burned to death, or was burned in the fire. What did Hitler do? He didn't hang them. He put them into gas chambers. And then he put them into those big ovens where he got rid of the bodies of the Jewish people. We see a lot of things that very similar here, guys, in this time period. Okay? So, guys, by not having a solution for Germany in the 1920s is going to lead us into a Great Depression. We should have had Germany out. Germany was one of the world's great economies. And we did a few little things trying to help out Germany, but in whole, Germany was left wide open for a person like Adolf Hitler to come in there and try to make Germany great again. Okay? So, guys, you've got to really watch what history teaches us in this time period. That we've got to take care of all the people and not let one group falter or have an economic disaster because it's going to drag us all down with it. And President Coolidge did not have enough sense to see all this stuff. You know, he was kind of a strange man anyway. He had a wife and he had two sons. But Calvin Coolidge was not very vocal. He was very quiet. He went to a dinner party one evening, and a lady next to him says, "I'm going to make you say more than 3 words." And he returned replying, "You lose." He is called Silent Cal. He was not very outgoing. And a lot of people didn't feel like they could reach out to their president. And the way he treated the farmers in this time period, you can see why that people did not quite trust Calvin Coolidge in this period of time. You know, Calvin Coolidge also had a son who died in the White House. President Lincoln lost Willie in 1862. The loss of Willie made Lincoln get heavily involved in the war because he knew there were mothers and dads across the country who were losing their sons in war, just like he had lost his little Willie, his 11-year-old kid. He died from scarlet fever. And Lincoln says, "I'll put myself into this war and win this war to save the lives of American boys." Calvin Coolidge lost Cal Jr. They built a tennis court behind the White House. Calvin and his brother decided to go get some new tennis shoes. They bought them too small. Calvin's feet got blistered. He developed blood poisoning and died from it. This is 1920s medicine. Today they've been going to the ER, getting a shot of tetanus, you know, getting your tetanus shot, and having your foot bandaged with some cream on it of some kind, and you'd be just fine. This time in the 1920s, you don't have any kind of medicine that you can use on these kind of problems. Blood poisoning was a killer. Tonsillitis was a killer, and so was appendicitis. My great-great-grandmother died from appendicitis. She's out in rural Mississippi, out in Neshoba County, Mississippi. They were rural folks. Grandpa Will worked for a sawmill. She had 8 kids at home. She just had a little boy, he's about 2 years old, and she developed appendicitis, and she died at home from it. They didn't know how to take care of her, and she died from it. And my grandpa, who was 8 years old and his mama died, said his mama died a horrible, horrible death, that nobody deserved to die the way that she died, from appendicitis. So Calvin Jr. dying from blood poisoning was not uncommon during this time period. But it also made Calvin Coolidge a one-term president. He did not run for a second term, and he could have. And but he was just not paying attention here to the economy and how it's treating these farmers during this time period. All right, it's during the 1920s we enter what is called the Second Industrial Revolution. The biggest item on this Industrial Revolution is going to be the automobile. The American people in the 1920s will purchase over 29 million cars. Henry Ford becomes extremely wealthy. The Dodge boys, Otis and Willis and Studebaker and Oldsmobile and Pontiac. And who else can I think of? I said Studebaker. Who's the other big one of this time period? You had Ford, you had Chrysler, you had Dodge, you had Plymouth. You had all these major car companies during this time period. Packard is one I'm thinking about. Packard made the most beautiful car of all the ones of the 1920s and 1930s. You guys, you only go and strive to go find you about a 1948 Packard. They are beautiful automobiles. If y'all watch the movie Driving Miss Daisy, one of the cars that she has is a Packard from 1948. Beautiful car. Okay. Automobiles becomes a major consumer good of the 1920s. Right behind it comes the radio. The radio came out of World War I. Radio was used for communications from the ground to the air and from the ground to the ocean. In 1923, radio stations began to pop up all over the country. Every major city had a radio station or two or three. In 1926, here come the radio broadcast companies. Here comes Mutual Broadcasting. Here comes CBS Broadcasting. Here comes NBC Radio Broadcasting. And they start broadcasting radio programs in the evenings across the airways. Where you go through and watch these sitcoms on the weeknights, they had them on the radio. And the radio taught you how to imagine what their houses looked like inside and how they lived and how they looked. You had your own mental picture of how the radio appeared as if it's on television. Your imagination filled in with the scripts from the radio shows. You had concerts from Carnegie Hall. Old Cab Calloway on CBS Radio started broadcasting live on Saturday nights from the Cotton Club in downtown Harlem. So all this begins to change here with the radio. And of course, you have the movies being produced during this time period. In 1927, you have your first talking movies. So you guys need to watch these old 1920 movies on Turner Classics on Sunday nights. They show these old 1920 movies. And I want to tell you something, they're pretty impressive. Their special effects are extremely impressive considering the time period in which they're trying to pull off these monsters and these other ghouls on the movie screen in this time period. And then here come your small electrical appliances. Here comes your handheld electric mixers. Here comes your toaster ovens. And here comes your toaster that makes toast for you. All right? Here come your small appliances. Here come your electric can openers. Along with your small appliances, here come your big appliances. Here comes your refrigerators that is powered by electricity. Before you had electric refrigerator, you had one that's a wooden box. It had two parts to it. The top part is where you put your food, and that part was insulated. And the bottom part is where you put the ice. And it was insulated. And every morning, the iceman came by your house, and you bought a block of ice for usually 3 cents a block of ice, and the block of ice went into that bottom part of your refrigerator. And they kept the food inside your refrigerator at a suitable temperature. It would not spoil. But every day, you had to buy ice for your ice box. Okay? With the refrigerator, you have no need of an iceman, because your refrigerator is kept so cold, you don't need ice in your refrigerator to keep it cold. And plus, you have ice trays that can break open and give you cubes of ice to put in your tea or into your cola or into your mixed drink in this time period. And so now the Iceman is going to go on a decline, because now you can make ice at home, and it's free. Okay, just pay your power bill. With the electric refrigerator comes the electric freezer, and these were usually icebox freezers that were deep. They're like a big, huge box. The top opened up, and you can fill it with all kinds of meats and vegetables and all kinds of frozen goods that you want to have in the future. And so the icebox became a major part of this. Also, you could have a row of ice trays in your freezer that made ice. And you could keep big, huge containers, a plastic bucket in your freezer in which you pour the ice out into, and you always have plenty of ice. The ice runs out in the refrigerator. You go to the freezer to get your ice. Okay? So, guys, these two items here went a long way to advance convenience in your home. And then you had the electric stove and the electric oven. Before this time, you had wood burning stoves. You know, my grandmothers had both. They kept their wood burning stove, and they also had their electric stove or their gas stove, and they cooked on both of them. You guys do not understand how good a cake or a pie tastes coming out of a wooden stove. It is totally different than you get out of your oven today. Those pound cakes, and they put all the fresh fruit on them from the gardens and from their orchards. You just couldn't go wrong having fresh strawberries and fresh peaches and fresh apples and so forth on these cakes and these pies is unbelievable here. And being cooked in a wood oven made them even better. But the electric oven was more convenient. My grandmothers kept their wood stoves because of the weather. Hurricane comes up, they have their wood burning stove. The power goes out, a tree falls across the power lines, and you're 40 miles from the town, and then it's going to be 2 or 3 weeks when your power line gets back up. They had the wood burning stove. You had a backup here. Okay, I was into buying a wood burning stove. Those suckers are expensive. They're like $4,000 for a wood burning stove. And to get one installed in your house takes all these special permits and making sure the house is done correctly, it's insulated correctly, so you won't burn the house down. But the wood burning stoves are still around. You can still buy them. Okay, that's why most of you guys have your gas burning barbecue grills in the backyard, so you can cook on those in case of hurricanes or bad weather or whatever. Okay, so guys, here comes your appliances. Here comes your washing machine. Before the washing machine, you took your children. This is the mom in the house. She took her children, and she'd go in the backyard where she had a big, huge black pot. They're called a smudge pot. They're also called your wash pot, and they usually hold about 40 gallons of water. Well, you had to go through and have one of your kids run from the water well with a pail of water, which hold about a gallon. That's 40 trips to the water well to fill up this pot. All right. The other little kids were out in the backyard picking up sticks and limbs to build a fire up under the pot. You want the water hot so it boils. Once the water starts boiling, you throw in your Brillo tablets, and then you put in your white clothes. You do the white clothes first, and you wash them. You got a boat paddle. That's a real tongue twister. A boat paddle that you'll use to take your clothes with in the wash pot. You got an item that's got a real bad stain on it. You got a washboard, and you try to scrub the stain out with using the washboard. Washing took all day, guys. Monday was usually the day for washing in the household. Then the kids would go through and load up your 45-gallon zinc tub with cold water, and that's your rinse water. And once you got your clothes out of that pot, you put it into that cold water and you rinsed it out. Then you went through and used your hands, and all the kids got up there. Some took T-shirts, some took underwear, some took socks, and had to wring it out by hand. Flop it and hang on the clothesline. Then they poured out that rinse water and refilled that zinc tub with more water. And here comes the colored clothes. You wash them first, your white clothes are going to get dyed. So you put your colored clothes in next, and you wash them. You rinse them in that cold tub water. You wring them out, you hang them on the clothesline. When they got dried, they looked like dead cats. They were stiff as a board out there on that clothesline. You had to go inside and get your pressing irons and put them along the fireplace. You built a fire in the fireplace and put your irons in front of that fire. You might have as many as 10 or 12 irons that you would use to press your clothes with. Then you had a spray bottle our sprinkle bottle. My grandma's had sprinkle bottles. They sprinkle the water on to clothes. Pour a little, spray a little bit of starch on there, and that's also another water bottle with holes in it. They sprinkle the starch, sprinkle the water on the clothes, and then they press them using a pot holder to hold the handle of that iron. That's how hot these things were. And they press those clothes out, that iron those clothes. When you went to go put on your pair of overalls, you had to go through and get your big toe pointed down to break the seals between the legs of your jeans, of your overalls. And then you walked funny for about 10 minutes because the pants were so stiff, it'd go through and pull the hair off your thighs. That's how you had to do clothes. Now, you got a washing machine that you fill the machine full of water, you put in your Brillo pads, and you put in your white clothes, and you wash them. When the clothes are ready to be spun out, you pull the plug under the agitator of the washing machine. It drained the water out of your washing machine while it spun the clothes. On the top was a roller in which you roll the water out of your clothes. Then you hung them on the line. But instead of pressing irons, now you got an electric iron that you iron your clothes with. And this small appliance went a long ways to improve how you wash. By the way, today's washers and dryers that you enjoy today, the ancestor is going to come in the 1950s. It'll be 1958 before you start seeing clothes dryers. And they're going to be pretty primitive. The one I have today is unbelievable because they'll go through and iron your clothes for you. I just put a little bit of water in the tank and set it on steam, and it'll steam the clothes. I don't have to worry about ironing clothes anymore. Your washing machine's got special settings, that you never dreamed before. All you had was on and off. And now I have like 20 settings on my washing machine that I can wash delicates and wash baby clothes and wash sheets and towels and, bedding and all kinds of stuff on different settings. It's just totally crazy today. So here comes these new major appliances in the telephone. Here come into the arena, the new appliances that come into being here in the 1920s. Then you have the telephone. The telephone is going to vastly improve American communications. All you had to do was pick up the receiver on your phone and click it, and you got the operator. You tell the operator who lived there in town who you want to speak to. And she would hook you up on her switchboard. In about 4 minutes that you made the initial call to the operator, the person you want to talk to is online. It's interesting. You can usually walk to their house quicker and you can get the hook up on the telephone line. It's been easier to just walk down the street two doors down and talk to her than try to go through and try to call. All right? In the 1950s, you start seeing regular long-distance telephone calls being made across the country. You dialed a 0 on your rotary dial, and you got the operator. And you told her who you want to talk to. It's my grandmother Causey over in South Mississippi. Mother be on the phone for at least 5 minutes waiting for the connection to be made because it went from operator to operator to operator across South Alabama and across South Mississippi all the way to Liberty down below Natchez. And it took a while to get grandma on the telephone. In 1967, the American telephone companies are going to bring in direct dial. You'll dial a 1 and you'll dial an area code. Ours was 904 at that time period. Now it's 850. And you dial the number you wanted behind it. And within about 20 seconds, you have the person's phone ringing. Today on your cell phone, you make a phone call to Paris, you're connected in less than a minute, in less than a second. It'll be dialing almost immediately after you, or I should say, be ringing the phone, be ringing on the other side by about 3 seconds after you dial the number. It's amazing here. You can call people so much quicker now than you could in the past here. So here come the telephones. Here comes canning. They started canning pork and beans. They started canning corn and all kinds of different kinds of beans, your vegetables, green beans, string beans, peas. They're all being canned. Here comes your canned meats. Here comes your Spam. Here comes your potted meats. And here comes your tuna fish and your chicken that are all being put into a can. You open the can up. I rinse mine with water after I open the can. I run water through the meat, drain it out real good, put it into a big bowl, like for instance, tuna fish. add my deviled eggs to it, or add my eggs to it, my chopped up eggs. And then I'll go through and add my relish, maybe a little bit of onion, maybe some apple or some grapes or whatever I want to put into it. Make it a bit more tastier, not so fishy. And all of a sudden you got a good bowl of chicken salad sandwich or turkey salad sandwich or tuna fish salad by doing this here in this time period. So we started seeing the use of canning here. Here comes chemicals. Here comes your Clorox. Here comes your house cleaners. Here comes your floor cleaners like Pine Sol. Okay? Here comes your Comet that you sprinkle the powder into a sink and scrub it just as clean as it can get it. It gets out stains out of your white porcelain. You have that. You have special cleaner for your refrigerators and for your stoves and for your bathroom cleaners. And all this comes out during this time period for the chemical businesses. Okay, here comes your toothpaste, here comes your mouthwash, chemicals. Even your shampoo and your face scrub and anything else that you might want to use, your lotions, come out of this chemical business here to make your life more important. Here comes synthetics. Here comes rayon and Dacron. Here comes polyester. Here comes various kinds of artificial silks. They're all being produced here, guys, through synthetics. Here comes your plastics. Usually used for containers to hold these chemicals in, all right? And then finally is going to come your hot water heater. This is going to change everything. The American Standard Company begins to make hot water heaters in the early 1920s. By 1925, the American people are demanding bathrooms in their houses. My grandparents took a bedroom that was quite large, and they cut a corner out of it for the bathroom. The bedroom was still large. They made a closet on the other side of the bathroom in the bedroom. So you had a closet in the bathroom in that big, huge room, which was still like 12 by 12 when they added the bedroom to it. These were huge houses back in the 1920s and the 1930s. And the bathrooms would have a hot water heater in the bathroom. We hooked them to the sink and also to the bathtub. A lot of families bought 2 hot water heaters. They put one in the bathroom, they put one in the kitchen. When they wash dishes, they'd have hot water for washing dishes with and for other areas to clean up from. Okay? The hot water heaters changed everything. People started bathing like every day, and the doctors got concerned about it. The American Medical Association wrote an article in the 1920s about bathing. They said if you bathe more than 3 times a week, you are hurting your health. That bathing too much was not good for your health. Here we are today bathing 10 times a day, especially in July and August. All right? And here they're trying to tell us it's going to kill you if you bathe too much. But the hot water heaters made a big difference here. You know, another thing you guys don't realize also, and this was true until the 1970s, a lot of your products that you use in your house were given to you in glass bottles. They didn't use plastic, they used glass. Your shampoo came in glass bottles. If you're in the shower and you drop that glass shampoo bottle on the floor, you have some pretty cut up feet when you got out of that shower. Using a bathtub and broke the bottom of the bathtub, you are in serious trouble trying to get out of that bathtub without getting cut wide open. It's a major problem. Your colas came in glass bottles and they would explode on you. You'd hold the bottle by the top and twist off the top part, and the explosion took place below your arm, and you'd have your arm full of glass where that bottle exploded. So these new bottles we have that we put colas in and so forth, they're a real lifesaver for a lot of people here. And but a lot of people got hurt from the glass bottles here that was used in the 1950s and 1960s, even the 1970s. You don't start seeing Coke in plastic bottles until the 1980s. And of course, people complained because it didn't taste the same. Plastic bottles don't taste the same as a glass bottle does. Your cola out of a glass bottle tastes 3 times better than it does out of a plastic bottle. It just changed the taste of your cola here. And that's why a lot of people didn't like to change over. They had to because of safety reasons. And plastic made a big difference here. Okay? This is also the time period in which advertising becomes a major part of the ball game. Do y'all know that F. Scott Fitzgerald worked for an advertising agency in New York City in the 1920s? He'd go home at night and he'd write his novels. He wrote This Side of Paradise and The Great Gatsby while working for an advertising agency there in New York City in Manhattan. Advertising becomes extremely important here with these new consumer goods here. okay? You had to go through an advertise to tell the person why they needed the product. Why do you need this wool suit? Why do you need these floor shine shoes? Why do you need that new girdle? And they use people as testimonials here in advertising. I went through and I went down to downtown New Orleans to DH Homes, and I bought this brand new wool suit just for job interviews. I bought me an Arrow shirt. I bought me a clip-on collar, and I bought me a tie. I bought me a brand new pair of Four Shine shoes. Got a pair of socks that matches my tie. Went on my first job interview and got the job. You need to come to DH Homes to get your work clothes. You will get the job because you'll look so awesome. They told you why you needed that product and what it would do for you in the future. And here comes modern advertising. My degree from Troy University is in advertising, so I know all about this stuff and how they went through and did all these different kinds of ads to persuade you why you needed that product. You had no idea you was going to buy this product until you saw it in the newspaper and you had to have it. That's how it is today, guys. It's called compulsive shopping. And how many of you guys are compulsive shoppers? I go to Lowe's to buy 100 screws and walk out of there buying 100 items. You know, instead of spending $25, I end up spending $200 at Lowe's. Go to Bass Pro Shop, same thing. Go to the grocery store hungry. It's what you come home with. Okay. It's all about compulsive purchasing here and why you need these items. And from this is going to come a new way to sell products, okay? And here's what happens here. You're going to start having engineers and designers in the plant system. Oh, you still have your vice presidents, you still have your plant managers, you still have your salaried executives that you had since the 1840s, but now you have engineers and designers who are part of your industry. They design, they engineer the new products. And you've always got 100 or more items under development through the engineering and designers of your corporation. Then you have your researchers, your marketing researchers. Marketing researchers are the ones who go out into town and they ask people what they want. You know, when I worked in the malls back in the 1980s, we had surveyors who walked the halls in the malls. They'd stop people and ask them various consumer questions. And these would go back to the industries and they would decide what they need to make or how to improve a certain item here, okay? These researchers are going to use the telephone. They will use direct mail. They'll go through and mail you a questionnaire. You fill it out, it's got to return postage on it, so you don't pay for postage. It's just for your opinion, which is free, and everybody's got an opinion. And you mail it back to the corporation. And they use their research technology, their research theories, and they will go through and start designing new products here. Okay, once the product has been designed and been made, it goes to the promotional and to the public relations department to be looked at. Now here, the product is going to be packaged. You want it in a very colorful package so people will reach for it first. That is more appealing than any other package is. Okay, you're going to have your public relations that will have press releases in the newspaper about this new product. There'll be ads in the paper. There'll be a complete media run on this new item that you have. Okay, and then of course you build the store display to put the item in to introduce it. Y'all go to the grocery store and look at all the little displays, and mostly cardboard displays. They're folded out, and the products are put on these displays for you to reach over and pick up. It's part of your compulsive purchases. Go down the cereal aisle. The most desirable shelf in the cereal aisle is the shelf in which the kid looks at while sitting in the cart. That's usually the third shelf down. And that is high rent shelving. You pay more to put your products there than you do anywhere else. And you know the kids are going to grab for it and will want it. Okay, it's all about compulsive purchasing. It's got to be colorful, it's got to be desirable, it's got to be well displayed, it's got to be well marketed, and people will buy it. Okay, so compulsive purchasing becomes the key word here, guys. You want people to actually buy these products. Do y'all know about that by 1929, that the 200 largest corporations in America, the 200 largest corporations in America control 50% of the nation's wealth. 200 of your largest corporations control 50% of the corporate wealth. That's saying something. That's telling you something here in this time period. Okay? Now, this next little segment is interesting in several reasons. For the first time, we're going to look at healthcare in America. Healthcare was originally given to the corporations to take care of. Healthcare was given to the companies to take care of. It's up to the company to provide their employees with the health care that they needed. It is not governmental, it is corporate. We started welfare in the 1960s. These corporations started giving off the medical part of their agreement to the federal government. And now we're asking for national health care. I say no. Put it back on the back of corporations, that every employee that they employ has to have free health insurance. That's how it was in the 1950s and 1960s. And the owners of businesses and the owners of corporations, owners of big retail box stores, they took care of their employees' insurance. And that's where it should go back to. We should not have national health care as such, except it's for the very poor who do not work. We should make the corporations pay for the health care. You know, some people say when you go through and make the corporation pay a higher income tax, they don't pay for the health care. That's where it all started. And it all started here with Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge told the American corporations, if America's business is business, it is business's responsibility to take care of the employee. He does not want to see labor strikes. He does not want to see the old problems that came from labor unions and labor disputes and all this stuff. He says it is time for the actual corporations to take care of their labor. The corporations must take care of their labor. Okay? And from this comes what I call corporate culture. It's also called welfare capitalism, or you can call it corporate capitalism. Okay? The corporation must take care of its employees. Okay? And this brings in the rise of the corporate family here. The corporation is going to give your employees benefits. Benefits is going to separate the old ways of handling labor to a new modern way to keep labor happy, to keep capitalism rolling. Okay? The first thing you have in your benefits program is going to be insurance. You have insurance here, guys. And this includes your health insurance. A lot of these corporations during World War I put in health facilities within the corporation. They had infirmaries, they had emergency rooms, they had doctors and nurses inside of the buildings of the corporation. They had clinics, if you please. You got hurt on the job, they take you to the clinic. If the injury was really severe, you go to the hospital. The corporation paid for all of it because you had health insurance in the corporation. Your doctors took care of your basic needs. Today, we have the same system. Your corporate clinic would give you your flu shots, have the health fairs. They would go through and take care of any kinds of cuts and bruises. They could do minor surgeries for you and so forth through the corporate facilities. You would be paying $10,000 for an x-ray, as you do today, or for a CAT scan as you do today. The corporations would take care of all of this stuff through their insurance programs, okay? You also had life insurance. If you should die, your family still has an income coming in. I want to tell you younger guys, when y'all get married, y'all make sure that you have adequate life insurance. When you have little kids, you need to have some life insurance. And I'm talking about $500,000 to $1 million in life insurance. Because if you should die and your family has no life insurance, they could be in real trouble. They could be in major trouble. And y'all make sure that y'all do have some life insurance in your benefits package. You want your health insurance, you want the life insurance, okay? You also had accidental insurance. If you should get hurt on the job or get hurt at home, you still get paid while missing work. This is where AFLAC comes from. All right, it pays for you when you have an accident, that you still get your income even though you're out of work. I got one on my program with the city of Valparaiso. That it takes care of my accidental insurance. It also takes care of my life insurance, and also it pays for my health insurance. I don't pay a penny for health insurance. It's all taken care of, but can't take care of by the city of Valparaiso. Okay, then you have old age insurance. This is your retirement insurance. You have old age insurance. You got a pension coming in until you pass away. And then when you die, you have a burial insurance. You got insurance that'll take care of your funeral arrangements. They take care of your body being prepared for burial. It'll take care for all the expenses that are encountered with death. Okay? So here come the insurance areas. And remember, I told you a while ago, the companies paid for this, not the federal government. This is a job that corporations got yoked with in the 1920s. And they wiggled out of the yoke by the 1960s and by 1970s. Okay, and they don't care anything about taking care of your insurance anymore. They want the federal government to take care of your insurance. Okay, which I don't think is right. All right, another area they're going to help you out is with stock options. The corporation is going to give you stock for working with them, for working for them. You're going to get stock that you can pay for out of your actual earnings each week. You'll also have a stock pension that will allow you to get stock each year as a service to the corporation. All right, give you an example of all this. When I worked for the limited stores, I bought stock each week. I try to buy at least $10 worth of stock each week, which means in 3 weeks I bought a share of stock, which is not too bad. All right, but this stock split 8 times while I was there. At the end of the year, for being a long-term employee, you got a stock bonus. If people had left the corporation without claiming their stock bonus, in other words, they were not vested in the stock program, they left early, all that stock went to us guys who've been around. There were some years I got 120 shares of stock just because people left the company. And plus the stock split 2 for 1, 2 for 3, the whole time I was there every year. I walked out of there with 4,300 shares of stock in that corporation. That's a lot of stock. It paid for graduate school at Ole Miss. Okay, and I had some money left over. All right, so guys, these stock programs are pretty important. And you have it deducted out of your paycheck, or you can buy it on your own. Okay, either way works here. Okay, when you buy stock in your corporation, you become an owner of the company. Stockholders are owners of the company. Now, you might not own a very big percentage, or maybe not even 1%, but you're still an owner of the corporation. You still have a stock option in that corporation, which means that the profits the company made benefits you. Those dividends come from the actual return of the money here, the investments here on your stock. So the more your profits you have in the corporation, the higher your stock market goes and the more dividends you receive from the corporation. Okay, makes a big difference here. And when you guys go to look for jobs, when y'all get through with college, you better ask about the retirement benefits and about the stock options, the 401k programs and all this stuff. You need to be reading up on this because this is where you make your money. You don't make money working, guys. You make money by investing part of your money. The city of Valparaiso, I invest the maximum is $18,000 a year on your 401k. I put all that in there, and I've been returning about 10 to 14% each year on my money. I didn't make that much money as far as working is concerned. I made all my money for retirement by buying stock in the 401k program. Between them and the college and other investments, when I quit working at age 75, I have plenty of money to live off of. I could be 100 years old and not worry about anything. And that's what you guys want to do. You got to go through and think about your future and what you will need in the future to live off of when you're not working. Okay, because Social Security won't pay a lot of it. You got to do it on your own. Okay, so guys, you buy stock in the company and you're part of the owner of the corporation. You feel as if you're important to the company. Okay, and then we start having various kinds of breaks and other benefits to the corporation. These came from the women of World War I. You're going to start having a break every 2 hours. You can go smoke cigarettes, you can get yourself a Coca-Cola, you can go through and talk to your friends, whatever. You got 15-minute break every 2 hours. And then you got a lunch break in the middle part of your working shift. So you work 4 hours, you have one 15-minute break, and you get an hour break. And this is for your lunch hour. Okay? And your lunch hour, you'll go to the corporate cafeteria. And here you'll have a selection of food that you can choose from each day. It always is being changed up. And you might pay as little as 10 cents for your lunch. And you go through the line and get all the food that you want and you eat it. They also have birthday parties once a month for all the birthday people of October or November or January, or February, or March. Y'all go to a special table where they serve you steak, potatoes, and salad and all the trimmings. And then here comes a big birthday cake out. And everybody in the room gets a piece of birthday cake. It's how you celebrate here your time or your birthday here at the corporation. You're going to have your health clinics. You'll also have daycare centers. So the corporations are trying to find ways to improve the working conditions, that you do have breaks, you have a little time off and so forth. You also going to start seeing vacation time and sick leave in this time period. And you might get 1 week of vacation time for your first 3 years. But after 3 years, you get 2 weeks vacation time. After 10 years, you get 4 weeks vacation time and so forth, until you have lots of time occurred for your vacation time. Another thing you're trying to do here also, guys, is trying to not only have your capital welfare to go through and give your people benefits, you're trying to build a corporate culture. You're trying to build a corporate family. A corporate family is very important in this time period. You start having team building, okay? You start having company picnics. 4th of July, you have a big, huge company picnic. The wives, the kids, all the people get together, husbands, they all get together. They might go to one of the big parks. They're in town. They'll have an orchestra playing out here in the pavilion. You'll have swimming in the big lake out here. You'll have people pitching horseshoes and doing tug of war, doing watermelon rolls, a whole 9 yards of entertainment. It's a big festival for the corporate employees. And then you have a big dinner, a big luncheon that's provided by the corporation. They're going to feed you here. The corporate birthday parties. I've written a manuscript about the history of Southern Airways, a little bitty airline based in Atlanta. They used to fly into Egg. At one time, they had 40 DC-9s and flew mostly on the East Coast. Pretty good little company to talk about. But they had a big, huge birthday party. June the 10th, 1949 was the day their first plane took off, flying from Atlanta, going to Memphis with 5 stops in between. Yeah, they stopped in every mud hole there was between Atlanta and Memphis. But every year, they had a big birthday party. They'd meet at the Atlanta airport. They'd go in the Southern Airways hangar, which was divided off. The aircraft was on one side. They had the big banquet on the other side. They had big tables. They were decorated. They had lots of food, lots of partying, lots of awards being given away to employees. A lot of years served pins being handed out to employees. They made a big festival out of their birthday parties. and the employees would be flown in from across the system. And about midnight, the planes would go back to get ready for the next morning's air service. And everybody was delivered back home again, ready for the next day's work. They all got home before midnight. So it's interesting how they did all this stuff. They had a Christmas party the same way. And their big jet hangar that now Delta Airlines operates on the south end of town is off Interstate 75. You go to that big Delta terminal in Interstate 75 just for the tunnels. That's where Southern Airways was headquartered. That's now Delta's big area. And they had a big Christmas party. The Santa Claus came flying in on the Southern DC-9. The plane pulled up to the hangar. Santa Claus and the elves and the flight attendants dressed as elves all got off the airplane. And they had a big Christmas party. They had all kinds of booths. The kids could win all kinds of prizes. They had all kinds of food. They had a great time. Delta Airlines still does this, this big part of it. They started creating various kinds of clubs. The Stamp Club, the Coin Club, coin collectors had a chess club. They played ping pong. All right. They had a golf club. They had a hunting club and a fishing club. They had all these various clubs that you could join here. The bowling league, the softball team, the baseball team. This was all done. Even Southern Airways did this in Atlanta. And there are bases in Miami and Memphis and New Orleans and here at Eglin. They had a base here at Fort Walton Beach. And they had these clubs. And they would have a good time. Here at Fort Walton Beach, the pilots would get together with the agents and the flight attendants and other people, and they'd go off deep sea fishing. That's part of the fishing club. Or they'd head up into Alabama to a hunting camp and go deer hunting up here in Wilcox County or up here around Selma. That's not uncommon here. And having big, huge bass tournaments, they go to Lake Martin or go to Mobile Bay or the Chattahoochee River or the Chattahoochee River fishing, trying to have their big, huge meetings. They had a good time. I'll tell you something about all this. Let's pretend that you have just joined a major corporation, they're a manufacturer, and you got a job on the loading docks. You have the worst job there is. You're trying to load up and unload trucks all day long, keeping stuff separated, keeping stuff sorted, making sure it goes in the right truck, the whole 9 yards. It's a big, huge headache of a job. When you were 4 years old, your daddy gave you a handful of golf clubs. And there around the house, you started playing golf in the yard. And you got fairly good at it. In middle school, you joined the golf team and you are pretty good at it. In high school, you join the golf team and you get a scholarship because of it. You go off to college, but you're not quite pro golfer, but you're a pretty good golfer. And you got this new job, this new corporation, hoping to work your way up because you got to start at the bottom, work your way up. On that first Saturday, after you join this company, you decide to go out to the golf course and play golf with all the people in the golf team. You got your president of the corporation that you do not know. You got vice presidents, you do not know who they are. You just have that bunch of guys, you don't know what they do in the corporation. They're all dressed in their golf outfits. You got a pair of cutoff shorts and a pair of tennis shoes on. You're like a ragamuffin. Your golf clubs are in your hand. You don't have a golf bag. But you got a driver, you got a 5-iron, you got a sand wedge, you got a putter. And you got about 10 balls that you can play golf with. And you go out there on that first Saturday, and everybody kind of makes fun of you. Who is that over there? Where does he work? Where'd he come from? He don't. What kind of a character is this over here? Does he actually work for us? But you shoot a 64 on that first day of golf. All that next week, you'll be investigated. They're going to find out who you are and what department you work in and where you went to college and the whole 9 yards. The next weekend, you go out on the golf course at 9 in the morning, and you tee off, and that day you don't do so good. You have to make a 70. Next weekend, you shoot a 68. That fourth Monday morning, here comes the vice president of marketing and advertising. And he says, "Young man, I want you to come with me. We're going shopping." You thought, what the hell is he talking about? Going shopping. And you go out to his car and you get in his car with him, and he starts telling you what you are going to be doing for the rest of your life. He says, you have impressed us, that you're now going to be my assistant, and we're going to go to the golf shop to get you some golf clubs and the whole shebang, the whole outfit, the whole 9 yards. And then we're going to go downtown, and we're going to get you 3 or 4 sets of suits and shoes and shirts and ties, because we're going to get you into the corporation. Now, you playing golf as well as you did, you're being promoted. So a lot of people saw job opportunities from these sports that they played in. You're the best bowler in the corporation, you ain't going to be on the loading docks very long. They're going to put you somewhere they need some money and keep you because they want you on their team. And so you build your teams around these sports. You have team building around these sports. And corporations today still do all this stuff here in this time period. Okay? Because of capital welfare, because of welfare capitalism and benefits, and because of your corporate culture in which you are now considered a member of the corporate family, you see the rise of labor unions decline. You know, we had close to 5 million people who belonged to labor unions in 1920. In 1929, it was less than 1 million. By giving these folks benefits, you don't have to worry about labor unions. That the corporations are giving you more free than the unions did with you paying union dues. And so you're going to start seeing a major change take place here in this time period. With this is going to come the rise of credit. These employees who belong to the corporation, who buy their stock here, have got good retirement programs, make a pretty good salary. They believe that their jobs will never end, that they have found their work for their future, and that these jobs will never end. And these guys begin to increase their credit amount. And here comes the problem with credit. They got so secure in their jobs, they started buying on credit items in which they really could not afford. And their excuse is, well, I'll buy it now because next year I'll get a 10% raise and I can pay it off. I don't have to worry about this. All right. The corporations also started creating what is called credit unions, in which you can go to the credit union and borrow money. You can borrow money to buy a house with, you can buy money to buy a car with. And a lot of these folks went through and bought houses in which they could not afford. Their wives were working in some cases, and they thought, maybe we can afford this, until they start having children and she can't work. And one income cannot pay for all of this stuff. They go and they buy a brand new car. With that brand new house and a brand new car, they want brand new furniture in that house. And they start exploiting the credit market. They go to the bank for the house mortgage. They go to the credit union for the car mortgage. They go to the department stores and get credit for the furniture and the small appliances they want in their household and for the clothing they wear. And all of a sudden, they can't pay off the minimum payment each month because they owe so much in credit. This runaway credit will get totally out of hand by 1927. In 1927, the housing market collapses. Banks begin to foreclose on houses of which people cannot afford the house payments for. The auto market collapses. People cannot pay off the minimum payments for their cars. And with these two major collapses in the economy, the housing market and the car market, with the farmers in trouble, with the problems in Europe already in problem, with prohibition not collecting any kind of tax money, we're heading for the Great Depression. We have got too secure in our jobs. We got too secure with the American economy. And the American people are going to suffer immensely when it all falls apart. You all know in 2006 and 2007, we're going to the Great Recession with George W. Bush. The housing market collapsed first, and then your automobile market collapsed. Your credit card industry collapsed. It looks just like the 1920s all over again. When I was teaching at the college during that time period, I told them, I said, y'all know the same families are doing this to us? The same millionaire families that control these industries are doing this to us? They got away with the 1920s, they're gonna get away with it, and they're gonna get away with it in the 2000s, and they did. You know, our Constitution discusses what is called piracy. Piracy was on the high seas. We had Congress gave authority to go after pirates on the high sea. How about pirates in the country? These corporations who go through and cheat and steal and squander, and then want stimulus money to bail themselves out with. They want our money to bail themselves out because they have screwed up. And I think these pirates need to go to prison, be it land pirates or sea pirates. And this is what's going on right here in this time period. The American people are playing a game called Keeping Up with the Joneses. If your neighbor buys a brand new car, you want a brand new car. They buy a brand new suit of clothes, you want a brand new suit of clothes. They go through and buy a brand new house, a brand new furniture, you want a brand new house, a brand new furniture. And we're still playing that game of Keeping Up with the Joneses, especially among your friends groups. Okay? So guys, you got a real problem here. The Great Depression just didn't happen. It's going to take a multitude of failures for the Great Depression to finally take hold. Okay? Then we're going to enter what is called the auto age in the 1920s. 29 million people own cars during this time period. With the new automobiles, here come your auto mechanics. The men who used to be blacksmiths in the old days are now auto mechanics. You need a mechanic to help you keep your car running and on the road. You're going to have special parts companies that open up to sell parts for your car, and you become backyard tinkerers. All right? You have tire stores. You go through and buy your tires and get your brakes changed on your cars. So you start seeing these new industries being evolved here in this time period. You start seeing your gasoline stations. You start seeing your showrooms. All right? You start seeing your billboards along the side of the road that advertises to you as you drive down the road. A captive audience going down the road reading these billboards. You know, you're on Interstate 10, that's the most boringest highway in the whole world. Those billboards are a big relief to you, all right? Because you can read the billboards going down the road and kind of keeps that semi-entertained as you clickety-clack down that old boring highway going to Jacksonville or going to New Orleans, okay? You know, the gas stations were very important also because the gas stations started branching out. Not only did they go through and sell gas and radiator fluid and all this stuff, windshield fluid and all this good stuff, they also started selling food in the gas stations. Do you know that you can eat your way across Mississippi in the gas stations? You have a station that you come to first that's going to have fried chicken, then one of them has fried catfish, then another one is going to feature all kinds of pulled pork sandwiches. Then you go to the next one, it's going to have all kinds of vegetables that are being offered you to eat. You'll have watermelon stands along the road and all kinds of fruit stands. You're going to see a lot of changes take place along the side of the road here in this time period. And the gas station is part of it. I remember going to the gas station, they used to go through and give away toys. If your dad bought $4 worth of gas and filled the car up. By the way, the gas costs about 10 cents a gallon for the gasoline. Your dad spent $4. You got yourself a prize out of the gas station. There's one on the causeway in Mobile we used to go by all the time that had all these stuffed animals, and you could go through and choose your stuffed animal if your dad got a fill up at the gas station. So that was interesting how that worked out. And so you start seeing these gas stations doing all kinds of stuff here in this time period. You also going to have the roadside diners. Now, y'all watch Guy on the Food Network, and you'll see all this stuff. And these roadside diners would usually feature a meat and three sides. A meat and three sides. You get some fried chicken or fried pork chop. You might go through and get you a steak, or go get you some cube steak or country steak, or whatever you want as far as meat's concerned. And they'd give you three sides. Usually rice and gravy or mashed potatoes and gravy. You get you some peas or some turnip greens. My favorite roadside diner is Danny's Fried Chicken in Niceville, and it's Thursday. They got the blue plate special on Thursday, and you get a fried pork chop, breaded fried pork chop. You get rice with mushroom gravy on it. You get turnip greens, and you get black-eyed peas and a nice sized piece of jalapeno cornbread. And that's their blue plate special. For desserts, they have lemon pie, chocolate pie, and pecan pie. And for about $10, I can get me an old roadside blue plate special. That's the iced tea, the food, and the dessert. Okay? Well, guys, in this time period, that $10 cost 25 cents. A blue plate special was 25 cents. You got your meat, your three sides, your dessert, and your tea for about 35 cents for the whole amount. 25 for the blue plate special, another 10 cents for the drink and for the pie. My dad told me if you had $1 in your pocket, you could eat for 5 days with no trouble. Your breakfast could be something out of the woods, like an apple or an orange or maybe some blackberries or blueberries or so forth. You have your blue plate special at lunchtime. In the evening, you just kind of scrounge around what you can find. My great grandpa Weatherford used to eat cornbread and milk for supper at night. He'd crumble up his cornbread and buttermilk and eat that for his dinner. That's what he had for his supper. If you guys see yourself eating cornbread and milk at night, that's all you ate. Good Lord, I'm eating ice cream at 10 o'clock at night. That's why I'm so big. I got to quit doing all that stuff. All right. So, guys, here come the roadside diners. Here come the roadside motels. Do y'all know that across from Big Kahuna's in the 1950s was a ton of roadside hotels and motels? They were built in a horseshoe shape. You had a driveway behind the main building. The main building you go to and pay your $3 for your one-night stay. And you had cabins behind in a horseshoe shape. You just pull in and just pull into the lot. If you guys live in Crestview, the old Hilltop Motel on Highway 90, down there just past the courthouse, that is an old drive-in hotel this time period. We got them all along the beach. Y'all have to kind of look for them to see them now because a lot of them are apartment complexes. But they had a bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchenette, and living room in these hotels. By the 1960s, they had a TV set in these hotels. And you pay $3 a night to stay in these roadside hotels. And across from Big Kahuna's, they had 100 of them. That's all they had out there. Do you know you could go to Destin in 1959, spend a whole week in Destin for less than $100? That cost you $6,000. It's amazing. You go to the grocery stores and buy your food. You cook it there in the hotel. You might go and go out to eat maybe once a day. Go have your lunch out, cook your supper inside and watch TV, or go to the movies. We had a bowling alley in Destin. We had a skating rink in Destin during this time period. We had some drive-in theaters that you could go to. The biggest drive-in theater, we had two of them in Fort Walton Beach. We had one right behind where Walmart is today, with a big, huge drive-in theater. And we had one over in Shalimar where the Methodist Church is, where Haverty's is located next to the Methodist Church. That's a big, huge drive-in there. And the screen faced Eglin Parkway. So you came across the Simcoe Bridge, or the Shalimar Bridge, I should say. You could watch the movies went around the curve there, going on down toward McDonald's and on down to Burger King. You can watch that movie. In the 1980s, they started showing X-rated movies. And people started slowing down pretty slow going there through Shalimar. They had those X-rated movies being shown on that old theater there. And they finally tore it down. The Methodist Church bought it, and they put their big church building where the old theater was. And then, of course, Haverty's comes in later and puts their big furniture store there where the entrance was into the drive-in theater. So we had all this for entertainment during this time period. Okay? The automobile is going to change everything. The American people have freedom they never had before once they bought a car. The only problem is we had to have some roads. In 1923, the United States Congress appropriates federal funding to build highways across the country. These are your old U.S. highways. Highway 1, Highway 90 through Crestview, Highway 49, Highway 61. These were all U.S. highways that were built during this time period. These highways did not have bridges, however, across the rivers. The rivers had ferry boats that would ferry you across the river. So you got to Baton Rouge on Highway 90, you had to go through and wait for a ferry boat to come across that river, which took about 30 minutes. You might be in Baton Rouge for 2 or 3 hours trying to get across the river. Of course, you still are today because the interstate gets backed up in Baton Rouge. All right? But guys, you have the ferry boats going across the rivers. Old Highway 90 is still there. You go up Highway 87 from Navarre up to Highway 90, and right across the road where the railroad tracks are is the old brick highway that was once Highway 90. When I was a kid, Highway 90 was a brick road going to Pensacola, going to Mobile. And it's an interesting way to go this time period. So we started building these roads. These roads were built as pay-as-you-go roads. You pay as you go. When the money runs out, you stop the road building. The next year, you get more appropriations, and you start building the roads again. That's how Mississippi builds their roads. In the early 1990s, Mississippi is going to pass a law to 4-lane all of their U.S. highways. I started Ole Miss in 1992. These roads were being laid out. They did them as pay-as-you-go. When I went back to Oxford in 1999 to a conference there at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture, all the roads I took that I used to take on 4 lanes were on 2 lanes are now 4 lanes. They got them all completed. And once you're at the Mississippi state line, you're on 4-lane roads on most of your highways now. When I go to Jackson, I don't go through Mobile. I go to Monroeville and get on Highway 84. When 84 for about 60 miles is 2-lane, and then you hit Mississippi. And 84 is 4-lane all the way to Natchez. And you got 45 heading up toward Meridian, on up to Tupelo, and on up to Oxford. You can go across Interstate 59 at Laurel. You can go anywhere you want to by going on Highway 84. And these roads have been in Mississippi all 4-lane now, which makes it a whole lot easier to go across the state of Mississippi. So it's interesting how they did these pay-as-you-go roads, and they're still being done today. And of course, your state funds would match the federal funds. If the federal funds gave the state of Florida $5 million, the state would match it with $5 million. They had $10 million to build roads with. They might go through and choose 10 roads to build over a 10-year period. And they'd build those roads. In the next 10 years, they'd build the next set of roads, and then the next set of roads. And by the time they have the 3rd set of roads again, they're repaving or working on the original roads. And they keep the roads going that way. You know, the automobile also brought in new leisure for the American people. We started going on camping trips. We tried to kill off the Indians in the 1880s and 1890s. By the 1920s, we're trying to live like them. We're going camping. The national parks opened up for camping. Down here at Grayton Beach was a big place for beach camping in the 1920s. People take their T-model Fords over to Freeport, go across the bay out to Port Washington, where they have their cars loaded off the ferry boat, and then drive on down to Seaside, on down to Grayton Beach. They had a big pavilion down there, and people would go down on the weekends, stayed in little old shack hotel rooms, little old motor court hotel rooms, go to Grayton Beach where the big pavilion was for the big dances and for the big bands and for the big barbecues and fish fries and all that good stuff. And the beach culture is evolving during this time period. You start seeing the ice cream man in a truck coming to your house. The old milkman is now in a truck coming to your house each morning before 6 o'clock, and the milkman delivered your milk. You guys had to worry about going out to Walmart or going to the dollar store in the middle of the night to get some milk, whereas in the old days, the milkman came to your house every day. I remember the milkman coming to my house. My dad always told the milkman to bring me a bottle of chocolate milk each day, and I drank the whole thing of chocolate milk in the whole day. That's one of my highlights of seeing that chocolate milk sitting out there in those glass jugs on the door stoop. And Mother would have a written note that she was sticking to the milk jug to tell the milkman what she needed. She needed some buttermilk, or she needed some cream, or she needed some half and half, or whatever she told him in a note. And then when the monthly bill came out for like $5 for the whole month for just milk, she put a check in the milk bottle, and the check would go back to the dairy, and of course the check would be spent, and mother would have her milk paid for. Boy, things were simpler then. But we're going back to that, to delivery to the house, because your groceries delivered to your house, your milk delivered to your house, your Iceman came to the house. It's all sitting around the home in the 1940s and 1950s. And we're going back to it in this pandemic. We're going back to the way it used to be in the old days here. Okay? Dating changed. My grandpa Causey gave me so much grief. When I was 16 years old, I had my first true girlfriend. Dad had bought me a 1966 Pontiac Le Mans. That's the car that the GTO was built off of. Mine wasn't quite that fancy, but he got me around. The car had 100,000 miles on it. Dad bought it for $500. Did you guys imagine buying a car for $100 and it actually ran? We did. And I had this car, had a console in the middle, it had bucket seats. I was a sporting man during this time period. I had it going on. Yo, Mississippi, my grandpa says, I feel sorry for you. I said, why? He says, when I dated your grandmama, I had a brand new carriage and a nice big horse. And I would go through and I'd get us some drinks together and put them into a little basket. These are usually colas, and make probably some moon pies, knowing him. And then I get some cookies and stuff. I have a little treats there on the buggy. I'd go and pick up your grandma, and we'd put a blanket over us with this cold weather, and we'd lay up there and hug on each other as the horse drove us to the party we were going to. Then after the party, we'd sit there snuggle and kiss, and the horse knew the way home. I feel sorry for you because you got bucket seat, a console, and you can't even get a hold of it. And you have to drive that car home because that car does not know the way home. And I realize something, guys. Today, we're trying to build a car that knows the way home. A self-driving car, just like that horse was a self-driving automobile in the time period. The horse knew where home was. And even the pitch's black night, that horse knew how to get to the house. So our new cars are going to be the reinvention of the horse that Grandpa Causey had on his dates in 1924. Kind of interesting to look at that in that mindset here. The automobiles also made declines on the trains. People quit riding the trains. Cars and roads could take you anywhere you wanted to go. Trains were restricted. They went from town to town. Once you reached the town, you had to find another means of transportation to go across town. Now, most towns had streetcars, or they had city buses. My dad told me in the late 1930s, when he went off to junior college at Newton, Mississippi, that he had no need of an automobile. He said, I'd walk out on Highway 19 and catch the bus to Philadelphia, get on the other bus that went through Jackson, that went right through Newton. And he said he cost me about 45 to 50 cents to go to school on the bus. And he says Newton was a small town. You could walk around town with no problems. After World War II, he went to Mississippi College over in Clinton. He's outside of Jackson. And he said we had the street cars and the city buses. And we didn't need a car in this time period. That we were not beholden to a car, because the buses had regular schedules on all the U.S. highways, and you knew when the bus was going to come, and you got on the bus and you went. So the automobile, the internal combustion engine, and the new trucking industry is going to replace the railroad companies. The buses are on your county roads and on your U.S. highways. They'll stop wherever you're on the side of the road waiting. You just wave them down. They'll pick you up, drop you off where you'll get dropped off at. There's no big deal. You got to town, you had the streetcars, or you had the bus service. Mobile, Alabama had streetcars until the mid-1960s. I remember the streetcars in downtown Mobile. I remember the streetcars on Palafox Street in Pensacola as a kid. Where the streetcar didn't go, the buses went in Mobile and Pensacola. So you had a way around town with no problem by using the bus service here. Okay? So guys, automobiles, trucks, and buses are going to displace the railroad companies. The railroad started going bankrupt. And that's going to lead to the Great Depression. It's going to lead to the Great Depression. Okay? When the railroads start falling apart, and they were America's big industries in the 1800s, and now they're declining. You know, I remember, guys, in the 1960s, I lived in Crestview, we had 8 trains a day. These are 8 passenger trains a day that went through Crestview. We had 4 going eastbound and 4 going westbound. I knew of a lady who was a piano teacher. She lived in Defuniak Springs. And in the morning, she caught the 6 o'clock train in Defuniak Springs going to Pensacola, and she'd go as far as Crestview. She'd get off the train in Crestview, and she taught piano lessons all day. At 4 o'clock, she caught the train going back to Defuniak Springs. The next morning, she caught the train going to Mariana. And she taught piano lessons in Mariana and took the train back in the evening to Defuniak Springs. On Wednesdays, she taught there in Defuniak Springs. On Thursday, she went to Milton and taught piano lessons. And on Friday, she taught piano back in Defuniak Springs again. And her whole job was, depending upon the trains, going to those various communities so she could teach piano lessons during the day. And that's how she made her living. Okay? So trains are going to be replaced by the buses. They'll do the same thing. And she'll probably have better service through the buses than she would through the train system. So you kind of get an idea what's happening here in the transportation of America in the 1920s. Then, of course, probably the biggest thing about this period of time is Prohibition. Drinking becomes more popular during Prohibition than any other time in American history. People loved having illegal alcohol. They loved playing the game of who could get away with drinking illegally. In the book I've been reading about Bohemia, New Orleans, it discussed how these great writers and these great Bohemians of New Orleans would always try to find enough liquor to have a big, huge party. And they partied as if that's the last party because they never knew if they'd get more liquor for another party. And several months later, by them all collecting and going around trying to get liquor, they finally got enough scrounged up to have another big party. They love their big parties centered around liquor. Okay? And remember, there's no tax revenue off this liquor business. Okay? Now, before Prohibition, only men went to taverns. Only men went to bars. During Prohibition, everybody went to speakeasies. The girls went to speakeasies during this time period. And of course, these speakeasy bars would hire jazz musicians, which gave a lot of employment for African American musicians, both North and South. They did real well during Prohibition. They had good jobs to play their music here in these speakeasies. They had gambling going on. And these American women, these women of the speakeasies, wanted pretty drinks. They wanted drinks with grapefruit in them. They wanted drinks with grape juice and lemonade. They wanted drinks with umbrellas and olives and cherries in the drinks. They wanted the pretty drinks. And America's drinking culture begins to change because here comes the cocktails. Another way of drinking, another way of enjoying your spirits here in this time period. So, guys, Prohibition expanded drinking, and women are going to go to the speakeasies. Women started smoking during this time period. This was really scandalous. These ladies, these young girls in the 1920s had Victorian grandmothers. Their grandmothers would not dare smoke. They would not dare put liquor to their lips. They had long hair, which they'd go to the beauty shop once a week and have their hair washed and repiled up on their heads. They wore like 70 yards of fabric. They had on stockings. They had on bloomers. They had on 3 or 4 slips. They wore dresses. They wore aprons. They were covered from head to toe here. And these young ladies of the 1920s, They didn't dress like this. They started wearing low-cut blouses. They started showing cleavage. They wore short sleeves. They started wearing short skirts. They started wearing knee-high stockings. They started wearing open-toe shoes. They were totally rebellious of their grandmothers. They also cut their hair off. They bobbed their hair. They said they wanted to live life like a man lived, free and easy, no restrictions. Oh, they did buy the Clairvaux makeup. They did buy the rouge and the powder and the eyeliner and all this kind of stuff. They still looked very feminine in their dressing, but they added to their toes toenail polish. They put on their fingernail polish during this time period. And these new girls were called flappers. The flappers were young ladies who went to speakeasies, who smoked, and who wear skimpy clothing. Because these girls wore less clothing than their grandmothers and their mothers had worn, the textile industry begins to go under. They're not selling the same amount of cloth as they had in the past years. You know, the textile mills and the railroads were two of America's biggest industries of the 1800s. And here by 1920, they're both going to the wayside. They are both going to the wayside. These women believe in free sexuality. They believe they can live their lives just like men can. And so it's really interesting here what takes place here during Prohibition. And these hidden speakeasy bars in which these women are going to go with their boyfriends and their husbands to have a good time. Okay? It's going to be a real interesting time period here for these ladies here. And then here comes American segregation. Black America has realized by the 1920s that white America will never accept them. However hard they try to become part of the political, economic, or social part of America, white America will always throw in Jim Crow and white supremacy. And Black America realizes they must segregate themselves away from white society. And this will turn into the Harlem Renaissance. Across the country, communities of Black folks, from sharecropping, from mill towns, are going to head to special areas of the country to reestablish themselves. I think about Zora Neale Hurston's family. Her father was a sharecropper in Alabama. And a large number of sharecroppers got to the point they could break even. And when they broke even, they left Alabama, several hundred families. And they traveled all the way down to the bottom part of Florida, which is then Orlando. Below Orlando is nothing but swamps. They didn't want to go down there in that area. They went to an area just north of Orlando, Florida, and founded a town called Eatonville. Zora Neale Hurston's father became the mayor of Eatonville. This city did not allow white folks. They had their own politics. Their own people ran for commissioners for the community. They ran for mayor. They ran for sheriff. They did not allow white folks in their communities. They built their own all-Black communities here. And this happened around the country, guys. Rosewood and St. Augustine. Rosewood, St. Augustine was one of these centers here. Harlem in New York was one of these centers. Harlem was a part of town that was never real well established. And in the early 1920s, African Americans discovered Harlem. They had once been in the 5 Point slums. They had been in the Tenderloin areas. They had been in San Juan Hill area. And finally, they make their way up to Harlem. And here they built a city within a city. And in the city of Harlem, they have their own car dealerships. They have their own insurance companies, their own magazines, their own newspapers, their own grocery stores and clothing stores and hat shops and shoe shops. And white America was not part of it. They did it among themselves. Over 200,000 people had moved to Harlem by the early 1920s. And here they built a Black city that realized they cannot depend upon a Black America. They cannot depend upon white America. That Black America cannot depend upon white America. okay? And here they built a middle-class black society. Remember, guys, the Freedmen's Bureau was trying to build a black middle-class community. But the funding got pulled out under the presidency of U.S. Grant, and it ended up in sharecropping. So here they are some 50 or 60 years later trying to rebuild the dream because they realize that white America will not help them. Just like the women and just like the South and the New South movement, building industries, they realize that Northern people would not help the South rebuild economically. Women realize the men would not help them out. And here they realize in the Harlem Renaissance that white society will not help out black America. They must do it on their own. They must pick up their own bootstraps and do it on their own. Okay? So Harlem becomes a city within a city in which black Americans build a middle-class society. They have their own institutions here in the city. But they also have a mixing going on that brings in white folks, like the Cotton Club. The Cotton Club is a Jim Crow club. They have black performers on stage, but white audiences on every night except for Thursday. Thursday night, the Cotton Club does not allow white folks in the club. It's only for black folks. And so you have performers here Monday through Sunday, except for Thursdays, in which white audiences enjoy the entertainment here in the Cotton Club. And a lot of your agents who help out your black performers, your musicians and so forth, they have to have agents in order to get gigs. And a lot of these agents they have are Jewish. You have the Jewish connection that's having black Americans get their business, get their incomes. It's interesting. I look at Cab Calloway. Cab Calloway had an agent, a Jewish agent, who demanded 40% of what he made. The agent wanted 40% of what Cab Calloway made. Calloway got 60%. He's still sharecropping, guys, and a new way of sharecropping. Today, agents make between 3 and 10%. And they still make lots of money being agents at that amount of money, okay? So, guys, you have this new situation going on in Harlem. You also have the people here, reformers here of Harlem. And a lot of these are going to be your artists and your musicians. The first one you guys to know about is Langston Hughes. I got a nice long article about Langston Hughes in the lecture notes. Langston Hughes was a gay American. And Langston Hughes saw situations from a different perspective than most people did in the 1920s. He saw it from a gay man's perspective. And he saw how he's been discriminated against as being a gay man and also being a black man. And he started writing poetry about his situation. In the 1940s, he saw Adolf Hitler. And he saw fascism. And he realized that fascism is nothing but Jim Crow. And he wrote a poem in 1944 that says, how much longer does America fight Hitler and Jim Crow? How much longer does America fight Hitler and Jim Crow? And Langston Hughes is known as the poet laureate of Harlem during this time period. Then you had Zora Neale Hurston from Florida. She started writing here about the people who lived in various societies. She wrote about Creoles. She traveled the Caribbean and she wrote about Creoles across the Caribbean. She was in New Orleans. She spent a lot of time writing about voodoo and hoodoo out of New Orleans. She spent time in our area of the country through Northwest Florida and South Alabama. And she started writing novels based on her experiences. You guys need to read Zora Neale Hurston. But I want to tell you something about Zora Neale Hurston. She writes in the old black Southern dialect. And you've got to read her out loud, pronouncing the words as they are spelled. Okay? It's hard to do. It'll take you several tries to get through the first pages of her novels because the way she writes them in that old Southern black dialect. Okay? But her novels are priceless. She wrote a novel called Men and Mules. Dust Prints on a Road. or footprints on the road. I know it's dust prints. I got it right. Dust prints on the road. And then she wrote one that is called Their Eyes Were Watching God. Amazing novel. Amazing novel. And it deals with the Black experience living in an all-Black community. And you guys need to read this stuff to understand what America has come through and where we're heading to. And I want to tell you something. Every American scholar, every American student needs to read Zora Neale Hurston. You need to read her. She's an important person in this time period. You had Alan Locke, another writer of the Harlem Renaissance. You have Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson was a baritone singer who did not get very many gigs in America. He found his success in Europe. But he did find a little success out of Birmingham, Alabama. In the 1920s and 1930s, Hollywood did not make Black movies. And Black Americans saw a need to be entertained by motion pictures. So in Birmingham, Alabama, they started an all-Black studio that made nothing but Black movies. Y'all can watch all kinds of documentaries that deal with Black cinema of the 1920s and 1930s. And Paul Robeson becomes an actor in the Black cinema out of Birmingham. All right, in 1937, Hollywood came calling on Paul Robeson. They want to do a Lerner movie from a play that he wrote that was called Showboat. And in the song, in the musical Showboat is a song called Old Man River. And they recruited Paul Robeson in 1937 to sing the song Old Man River in the movie. When the movie was shown across the South, they cut out this scene. They would not allow Paul Robeson to sing in the movie across the South. And his performance is remarkable. Y'all can watch it on YouTube. I think I got it on my video collection for this class. Paul Robeson singing Old Man River in this time period. And then there's Betsy Smith. One of the greatest singers of this time period was Betsy Smith. Betsy Smith was called the Queen of the Blues. She kept Columbia Records in business all during the Great Depression. She kept Columbia Records in business all during the Great Depression. She decided in 1936 to tour the South. She came into Memphis, Tennessee, and here she got a rent-a-car. She's planning to sing her way down the river to New Orleans. Outside of Clarksdale, Mississippi. It's on about 60 miles south of Memphis. She's involved in a car accident, and Betsy Smith is severely injured. They carried her to the Clarksdale Hospital, a Jim Crow hospital, and they refused her. It's just like me taking my puppy, Maddie, to the emergency room at Twin Cities Hospital wanting service. And they won't see Maddie because she's a dog. And here in Clarksdale, they wouldn't see Betsy Smith because she was Black. And the friends with her reloaded up and headed back to Memphis to get her medical attention, and she died on the way to Memphis. Just before you get to Elvis's house is where she died. And this great queen of the blues is gone. Okay? So the Harlem Renaissance brings a whole new perspective into American music, American art, American entertainment, American literature because of these people. And I've got a great group of articles in the lecture notes that deals with the Harlem Renaissance. And y'all can read through those and look through them. I'm giving y'all all kinds of options to take this class, to delve into what you're interested in doing. I'm just giving y'all the overview of the class and letting y'all kind of pick and choose what you want to really look into and to go into. And I think it's the best way for y'all to learn history. All right. It's also during this time period that we have Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. We're studying the brain. Oh my God. These fundamental Christians across the world, particularly the Catholics, got really concerned about teaching about the mind. And they said that mental illness is God's business, that God made people crazy and insane and have dementia because they have sinned. That mental illness is caused by sin. You go and read The Kill a Mockingbird and Boo Radley. And a lot of folks in that book believe that he is mentally ill because of sin in his family. It's interesting that they would see things that way. That the working of the mind is God's business, and humans have no reason to delve into the bodily functions or into the mental functions of humans. We notice during this time period, guys, that Charles Darwin has been writing about all kinds of evolution and survival of the fittest and so forth. And a lot of people are concerned about teaching evolution in the school system. They thought that public schools should teach creativism and not evolution. That the church was teaching creativism, and whereas the scientist says we should be teaching evolution to help the American people understand the differences here. Oh, it made these Southern Baptists down here in the South so mad, these Methodists. Oh my God, this conservative groups that got so mad about this that they started passing laws in the states to outlaw the teaching of evolution. And one of the first states who did this was Tennessee, and the year is 1925. In 1925, Tennessee passed a law that made it illegal to teach evolution in the public school system. Well, the little old men of Dayton, Tennessee got together and decided to test the Tennessee state law. And they convinced John T. Scopes, the biology teacher here in the Dayton High School, to teach his little Baptist and Methodist students that they came from a monkey, that they'd evolved from a monkey. And you know, when they went home that evening and around the dinner table told their mamas and their daddies and their grandparents and their aunts and their uncles that they had come from monkeys, you know all hell broke loose. Somebody's ready to go through and shoot somebody. That's how mad they got. And John T. Scopes was arrested for violating the Tennessee state laws and teaching evolution. Well, the state of Tennessee is going to hire a high-powered lawyer to go after John T. Scopes, and his name is William Jennings Bryan, the old populist. Well, that made the people, the prosecution group concerned, and they went through and hired a gentleman from the American Civil Liberties Union. His name was Clarence Darrow. It turns out that Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan were old friends until this court case came up, and these two men battled it out. They went over all kinds of theology and all kinds of rules and regulations that dealt with the Christian perspective on all of this, and then the scientific perfection of all of this. And finally, old William Jennings Bryan declared that he was a biblical expert, that he could answer every question there was in the Bible. And Clarence Darrow called him to the stand. And he quizzed him all morning about theology. And these two men who had once been friends become enemies of each other. Well, after about 5 days of all this hoorah here in Dayton, Tennessee, and by the way, the local women here in Dayton, Tennessee began to make sock monkeys, and they sold the sock monkeys to all the people who came to the trial. WLS, the radio station out of Chicago, is going to have live broadcasts of the trial from Dayton, Tennessee. This is your first major media event. The radio comes and broadcasts it from coast to coast. And people across the country tuned into the Scopes trial. And here in Dayton, Tennessee, 12 little old white men are going to find John T. Scopes guilty of teaching evolution and breaking the Tennessee state law. Well, Clarence Darrow and the American Civil Liberties Union is going to appeal the court case to the Supreme Court of Tennessee. It's going to go to Nashville, Tennessee, to the Supreme Court. Well, guys, the problem here is the Tennessee judges realize if they rule against John T. Scopes, that Clarence Darrow will carry this court case to the Supreme Court of the United States. And the Supreme Court of the United States will probably find teaching evolution constitutional. And I'm pretty sure that William Howard Taft would enjoy being the Chief Justice over the Scopes trial in the Supreme Court. So Tennessee balked in Nashville and decided to declare that John T. Scopes was innocent. He was charged $100 for his court case, and that's the end of it. They were afraid the Supreme Court would find the Scopes trial legal and become the law of the land. And we're still debating the Scopes trial. Did humans come from the apes, or were they created? Well, guess what? DNA is telling us something. DNA is telling us both. Genesis tells you it's both. All you guys are Sunday school kids. I know y'all read the first chapter of Genesis. And it talks about how the sons of God saw the daughters of men and fell in love with them. Who are the sons of God and who are the daughters of men? Your DNA is 250,000 years old. That's when Homo sapiens started appearing on the earth. And me being a good Baptist, I try to be realistic about all this stuff. When I found out my DNA, that my personal DNA is over 75,000 years old, makes you kind of think about things and try to reconsider things. And try to look outside the box. And be a believer, still read your Bible, still be there. But do that DNA test. You guys will be so amazed what you find out about your DNA. And for $100 or for $200 for the whole shebang, you get everything you want to know. And I am still getting information all the time. And it's amazing about this type of study. So guys, we're still debating evolution in America. Then here come the writers of the time period. People like Gertrude Stein, one of the great lesbian writers of the 1920s. Her novels and her stories are almost pornographic. She is so sexually elusive, or what I should say, illustrated in these books that she writes. It's amazing what she got away with. You have Ernest Hemingway, a veteran of World War I who comes out of World War I, who writes a book called Farewell to Arms. He goes to live in Key West, Florida. One of the greatest books that he wrote was called Old Man in the Sea. Y'all need to read some Hemingway. You'll need to read a little bit of Gertrude Stein if you can stand it. Then there's F. Scott Fitzgerald. He's from Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. Came to Maxwell Airfield in Montgomery, Alabama for training in World War I, meets a local girl by the name of Zaire. What's her first name? Shoot, my mind's going totally blank here. It'll come to me. Falls in love with her, and then she breaks up with him. Then he moves to New York City after the war, picks up with Zelda, that's her name, Fitzgerald. They get married, Zelda's there, and he starts writing books. His most famous book is called This Side of Paradise. That's his first major book. And his second book is called The Great Gatsby. And you guys have got to read The Great Gatsby and watch the movies. There's one that stars Robert Redford in the 1970s. There's a newer one that came out around 2005 that stars Leonardo DiCaprio. And y'all need to watch the two movies and read the book. Read the book first, and then watch the Robert Redford book movie, and then go watch the Leonardo movie second. Okay, they're very interesting to watch. Okay. Then you have William Faulkner. William Faulkner has the rage to explain why the American South did what it did in 1861. Why did the South secede, and how did the South fail? And y'all need to read books like Light in August. You'll need to read a book called Absalom, and a book that is called, oh shoot, I forgot the title of that book is. The book is titled The Sound and the Fury. The Sound and the Fury, Absalom, Absalom, and then Light in August. But he wrote 16 books. I took a Faulkner class at Ole Miss. That was a crazy class that I took at Ole Miss. And we had to read 14 of his novels, and they're not easy to read. They're kind of like Zora Neale Hurston. You got to read them out loud because of the dialect in the books. But y'all need to read some Faulkner here in this time period. Eugene O'Neill, the playwright. You need to read about him. Read about his novels in this time period. These people are going to start looking at America through different lenses. They look through America through the gay lens. They look through America through the alcoholic lens. They look through America through the mental illness lens. They look through America through different perspectives to write their novels. And a lot of people did not like their novels. They were called trash. O. Erskine Caldwell wrote a book in 1940 called Tobacco Road. It was banned. I read it. I didn't see anything wrong with myself personally. I didn't watch the movie. I showed the movie to my dad, who was born in 1918, and Dad said, well, hell, this is what I grew up around. Said this was like home in the 1940s. So it's interesting to look at all these different writers this time period, okay? And y'all do need to look at the authors in American history and what they're writing about and getting the sense of time. You get to the 1930s and 1940s, y'all need to read Zora Neale Hurston and Eudora Welty and Truman Capote and Tennessee Williams and Ezra Pound and all these folks. Y'all need to be reading all these different people here in this time period. They're important people to look at because they give you a perspective of American history that you have never had, that you have never read about before or have ever experienced here, okay? And you need to read these novels and be aware of what they're writing about here. And of course, people said that novels are sinful, that novels are going to cause the downfall of America, that American novels are evil. And two groups come out trying to defend American morality. The two groups are the Ku Klux Klan and the American fundamentalist, the American religious fundamentalist. And they said America has got to change. Do y'all know the Ku Klux Klan had over 8 million members in the 1920s? In 1925, 250,000 Klan's members went to Washington, D.C. and marched in the streets. They actually marched in the streets. Where those kids were celebrating Joe Biden being elected president in front of the White House is where the Ku Klux Klan gathered in the 1925 March in Washington, D.C. You've got to know your history. The Ku Klux Klan said America is on an evil trail that's going to lead to destruction, that our movies and our novels and our morals have gone down the drain since World War I. The speakeasies are the devil's workshops. They also condemn prohibition. They said if America does not repent itself, it's going to go into great demise. They're against Jewish people. They're against Catholic people. They're against Black people. They're against immigration. They're against anybody who seems as being outside of the mainstream in this time period. Okay? They're totally against anybody out of the mainstream of this time period. And then you have the fundamental Christians. They believe that if America does not turn around and become saved again, to go back the way they said it used to be, which it never has been. You know, a lot of people today are talking about going back to a Christian America. When was America ever a Christian nation? Oh, we believe, but when do we actually were a Christian nation in which we did full Christian beliefs? We're removing Indians? Are having slavery? We're going through and oppressing people of color and immigrants? It makes you wonder about all this stuff. And both the Ku Klux Klan and the fundamental religious people told the American people, if you do not repent, God is going to punish you. How do the Ku Klux Klan and the fundamental Christians see the Great Depression? You know, the fundamentalists told us it's all about faith, that your faith will make you strong. And they started going through and testing your faith. You know, my grandma calls me when I climbed into the top of a big old huge pecan tree, and pecan tree's limbs do break pretty easily. And I got to top of that dang tree. And she hollered up there and she says, don't you, David Weatherford, be tempting Providence, because you're going to have a limb break on you and you're going to come falling out of that tree and you're going to break your arm. Well, guess what happened? I broke my arm when I was 5 years old, falling out of a pecan tree. Providence caught up with me. But these people says you got to go through and test your faith. And here come your snake handlers, and here come the drinkers of poison. They say if you handle poisonous snakes and your faith is true, that you will not be bitten. And churches across the South, particularly in Kentucky and Tennessee and North Carolina and Virginia, you had what is called the snake handlers. And they brought the cottonheads and the cottonmouths and the copperheads and the rattlesnakes all to church. They had a big old huge wooden box up front in front of the pulpit that was locked up full of snakes. And during the middle of the sermon, the preacher would march off down there, dancing around, prancing around, unlocking that dang snake box. And then people came up there and started picking up snakes and holding them, tempting, trying to prove their faith. I want to tell you something. If I go to church and the snake box shows up, I'm coming home and Jesus is going to drive the car. I ain't going to put up no snakes in church. There ain't no way. And then they start drinking arsenic. Testing their faith here. You know, y'all go on YouTube and find all kinds of snake handlers and all these fundamentalists they're involved in all this. I put a couple of them on y'all's video thing to watch on the video lectures that I have for you guys to look at. There's some crazy stuff out there. And these folks believed that their faith could be tested by drinking poison and handling poisonous snakes. So it's a real interesting 1920s here in America, to say the least here. Okay? Now, in the 1920s, we're also going to try to find a way to clear up the world's problems. I'm going to do this real quickly because our time is running out on us. In 1921, we had what is called the Five Powers Act. 5 countries came together in this time period. These 5 countries were the United States, United Kingdom, France, Italy, Japan, and China. Yeah, that's 6. We don't count us. Okay, so it's us, Great Britain, France, Italy, Japan, and China. And our main discussion here is arms limitation. The arms are the Navy. And here we agreed not to build any more warships and to mothball a large number of our ships. The United States agreed to mothball 30 ships. Now, we didn't destroy them. We didn't send them to the scrap yards. We mothballed them. And thank God we did, because after Pearl Harbor, we had to have these ships in order to get back in the game here after Pearl Harbor. We didn't have these ships. We've been in serious trouble in 1942 and 1943. Japan could invade the mainland of America. We didn't have our ships out here in the Pacific Ocean. And these ships are very important here when it comes to the end, after the time of Pearl Harbor. Okay? Japan agreed not to build new ships. What did Japan do? They increased their navy to become the world's most powerful navies. A navy so powerful they can take almost the Pacific Ocean away from the rest of the world. Okay, in 1922, we had the Foreign Debt Commission. The United States is going to give $12 billion to 10 European nations to rebuild after World War I. We're going to give $12 million to 10 European nations to rebuild after World War I. We told them that this loan would not be due until 1984. We never saw a penny of this money. That is $12 billion that could have gone to stopping the Depression in 1929. But the Europeans took that money and they pretty much squandered it, and the Americans are going to pay for it. In 1924, Charles Dawes is going to go to Germany. He goes over with Herbert Hoover, and they have what is called the Dawes Plan for Germany. So don't get this confused with the Dawes Plans for Native Americans. There's two Dawes Plans. Okay, there's one in the 1880s, and there's one in the 1920s. You're concerned with the one in the 1920s. That's a Dawes Plan to Germany. And the plan here was to rebuild Germany. We gave them close to $15 billion to rebuild Germany, and told them this money cannot be used for a war machine. Guess who got the money? And guess who built a war machine? The industrialists that we helped out will use this money to build Adolf Hitler's Germany. And so, guys, in 1924, we put down the down payment for World War II. Y'all realize we give away about $25 billion in the 1920s trying to help out Europe? And $25 billion we're going a long way to stop us having a Great Depression in 1929. In 1928, 62 nations around the world came together in Paris. It's called the Pact of Paris. And in the Pact of Paris, they outlawed war. In 1928, they outlawed war. Well, guess what? Japan was there. In 1931, Japan withdrew from the League of Nations and started the invasion of Korea. Made their way into Manchuria. Nobody came to stop them. By 1940, Japan has occupied almost 80% of what is now China. And then they start moving into Indo-Asia. They heading down toward Vietnam and down toward Thailand. They're making their way down toward Malaysia, making their way down toward Singapore. They're island hopping, and nobody's there to stop them. Nobody's there to stop them. Japan believes they're on their own, and nobody's there to stop them. All right? So World War II begins in China in 1931. Japan begins World War II in Asia in 1931. By 1936, over 300,000 Chinese have been murdered by the Japanese in this takeover. I want you guys to consider watching another movie in this class if you have time and have the desire to. I think you will like it. It stars an 8-year-old whose name is Christian Bale, who's Batman. And this guy is in a movie called Empire of the Sun. He's a kid of a British diplomatic family in Saigon who are captured by the Japanese. And Steven Spielberg produced this movie in the mid-1980s. This was the first movie shot in China in recent times. It's a very good movie. It's called Empire of the Sun, and it stars Christian Bale as a kid here who's separated by from his parents, who are in 2 different POW camps in this war. Okay? So interesting things to look at here. Okay? Well, I'm going to stop here with this lecture, and I'm going to start the Great Depression. And when I get to the Great Depression, I'll include the airline business, and I'll also include the election of 1928, which are in the lecture notes for this lecture. But I don't want to go over 3 hours for these lectures. That's just too long for me and for you, mainly for me. And I'll just come back and we'll do the next section here in a little bit. Okay? Okay, see y'all later.